This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Monday, June 1st, 2015. We're live and coming to you from the studios of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report here in cold, chilly, brisk Northwest Pennsylvania. I'm Doug Hagmann at the helm with fellow investigator, researcher, and most importantly, my son, Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, America's premier father-son investigative team. Our job is to bring you the news that propels the headlines, the news that is shaped and twisted and convoluted and hidden amid a funhouse of smoke and mirrors in the carnival that we call the corporate media. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. You know, we do the news and headline triage so you don't have to. You know, we want to thank all of our new listeners, all of the people that have tuned into us deliberately. Thank you for checking in with us and tuning in to us from all over the world. Again, you know, for new listeners, we broadcast live every Monday through Friday from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Our home base on the internet, folks, is hagmannandhagmann.com. That's two N's on Hagmann, the word and in between. You got to spell it all out, hagmannandhagmann.com. I want to tell you, speaking of hagmannandhagmann.com, we still are working on fixing the past show page. However, we'll say this, there's an article there. Of course, the promotion for tonight's show is there, but there's also an article that I penned early this morning. It's also up in Canada Free Press. I would urge everyone to visit both hagmannandhagmann.com and Canada Free Press. And at Canada Free Press, just leave a comment. Commenting seems to do something to the algorithm of the articles. Now, I'm not, quote, pimping my article, end quote. That's not my intent. My intent is to educate and inform, I should say. And what we're watching happening in real time is the search engines. Anything that is anti-administration is actually being knocked down in terms of the search engines. Now, this is not new. This is something that we've seen happen before. And there are ways around this. There are ways, and it's not just simply hits on a website. It's actually one thing that's more difficult to control is the comment section. So even if you say, hey, or just hey, or, oh, that was okay, fair article, or whatever it might be, it does something, and it puts the article itself, the information, back on the search engine, whatever that is. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it, but see, we're playing this game of censorship, and we're seeing it would take place. A guy that's no stranger to censorship, of course, will be joining us here shortly, and that's Dave Hodges. I want to mention tonight's broadcast brought to you by two of our great friends. One is AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. And there you can find everything wholesale or everything survival at really wholesale prices. And the other is HealthMasters.com. Now, HealthMasters.com, both are partners of ours. HealthMasters, they've got some fantastic nutraceuticals. Ted Brewer is just a fantastic man. I'm going to tell you something, and I watched this happen this weekend in both cases. HealthMasters.com and AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com reached out and helped people that we asked them to help without expectation of payment. They just did some things on their own dime, on their own time. And God bless them for being partners with us. Joe, welcome to the studio.
Great to be here. Tonight we have Dave Hodges from the Common Sense Show. And last night you were
I had the privilege of being on his show last night. And I got to tell you, Joe, Katie Whalen from Katie Whalen, Essential Oils. Oh, my goodness. What a powerhouse of information. Dave Hodges, just a great team. And, of course, Dave Hodges, news director, Annie. What a great lady. but Dave Hodges himself, what an unbelievable man of character, integrity, as well as information. Thank you, dear. It was just amazing. So last night was just an honor and a privilege to be a part of his show, and I hope I didn't stink up his airwaves too bad last night.
Dave, it's great to have you back on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Joe and Doug. It's good to be back with you guys. It's been too long, and I'm happy to be back. And it's kind of interesting. We have Hagmann on Hodges, and now we have Hodges on Hagmann back to back.
Works out great.
Yeah, it does. And hopefully we'll have Hagmann and Hodges in soon. You know what? I'm not going to spill the beans. I'm just going to leave that alone. But Dave, it's great to have you, my friend. It really is. Last night was a blast. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, we got a lot of great feedback last night on this. I heard from people all over, far and wide, media, and just regular listeners, and they were basically captivated by what you were saying. And today, even though we've gone back to back, the hands of tyranny don't take a vacation.
Not at all.
I'm laughing because I've been working on a story now for almost 2 weeks, and it reached a nexus last night after the show, and it's mushroomed through the day. And, I have some breaking news about the Midland, Texas Walmart that's closed.
Oh, I can't wait. Ladies and gentlemen, please bookmark thecommonsenseshow.com. This is Dave Hodges' website, thecommonsenseshow.com. Listen to Dave Hodges weekly, new time. Oh, thank you. And I got an email today, David, from a listener, and God bless you. She said, make sure you thank Dave Hodges for changing the time for us East Coast people. So your new time is 8 o'clock Eastern every Sunday night, 8 to 11. God bless you for doing that. But let me tell you, folks, cutting edge of information, Dave Hodges, Midland, Texas, Walmart closing. Dave, go ahead, my friend. I know you've been working hard on this, and I'm buckled in. So go ahead.
This is a culmination of a lot of things, and excuse me if I search for words here because I've not yet told the story except to my news director, Annie DeRiso, in bits and pieces. And I was contacted by a gentleman named Marlon Brock. He's out in the open. God bless him. He's got the strength of his convictions to go public. And he first contacted me by email and told me of two people he suspected of being Jade Helm because they were in great athletic condition, young, and they were snooping around his property. And when he confronted them, they pretended to be from the electric company, but they were not from the electric company. They were they were imposters. He called the electric company and said, "We sent no such person out there." Well, that got my attention because, and by the way, Marlon lives in Big Spring, not too far away from Midland. And another lady who doesn't want her name used actually had two similar people of the very same description out in her backyard measuring some of her chicken coops and some of her other structures. She said she watched them for about 10 minutes, called the sheriff, said she'd had enough. The sheriff takes a long time to get out to where she lives, so she went out and confronted him with a shotgun. And God bless her, she's a 68-year-old widow, and she said, you get the blank off my property and you do it now. And this is really where especially Marlon got involved. It got my attention. And then Marlon started hanging out in Midland and taking pictures of the Walmart. And I'm coming out with these tomorrow, and I've seen that one of these pictures has already gone public, I think as of this morning. And what he has shown here is, and first of all, let me say this. Have you guys ever noticed on these closed Walmarts, you never see people going into the buildings?
Yeah,
never.
I've seen a lot of research done on this.
Yeah.
And I think at first they announced 5 Walmarts throughout the Southwest to be closed for plumbing reasons. And I've seen subsequent videos now where there's military vehicles being used and stored in the parking lots.
Well, yes, that's true. But you don't see people, except for the one Walmart that was closed, and they kept the pharmacy open for a while.
Exactly.
It's the one in California. And there they've blocked off the view from everybody. about what's in the store. They stacked up shelves and so forth about 12 to 15 feet high, and I ran the video on that on my website. But you don't see people going in and out of Walmart. And I'll get to that part a little later because that'll become very significant. But what Marlon was able to capture was a vehicle. He has a bunch of pictures, but among them was a vehicle that was had inscripted on it, Central Defense. And I've come to learn that is the Central Defense Security, and they're out of Memphis. And what's interesting about their website, they look like just a run-of-the-mill, security agency. But what I find interesting is they're at the Midland Walmart, and they're there amongst some of the military vehicles that have been seen. And when you go to their website, there's nothing really there that's suspicious, but it's more what they don't say than what they do say. They say that their clients are just regular old businesses, retail outlets, events, picnics, corporate picnics. They go through all these things, and they say, and we have Fortune 100 customers, but they don't mention who they are, except they run off a litany of the types of businesses they deal with, and they say at the very end, the government. And I find it interesting, if you were trying to promote your business through a website, and you had Fortune 100 companies, you think, number one, they would mention who those corporations are. I mean, are you doing B of A, Goldman Sachs? Because that would say, hey, you're in the big time. So they claim to do Fortune 100, but they don't mention any of their clients. And then, and they have no pictures of any of their clients, no testimonials. And I found that to be highly unusual, especially for a security firm that's trying to attract business. Yet they're growing. They just opened their 5th office in Indiana. They're headquartered out of Memphis, and they have a office in Lubbock, and that's where I suspect that these Central Defense vehicles that Marlon photographed are actually from.
Okay, so Dave, hold on a second. Let me ask you a question here, and I'm sorry to interrupt. You said security company, right?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay.
Yes.
We're talking about a private security company?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me the name again.
Central Defense Security. If you just put Central Defense in to Google, you'll come up with it.
Okay. The reason I'm asking this, being in the investigative industry for 30 years, Central Defense Security, you've got there are different classes of licenses. You've got to be state licensed. It doesn't matter if you work for the government or not, but you've got to be state licensed if you're a private security firm, and you've got to jump through a lot of hoops. Now, what I can do, based on this information, and thank you for sharing this, is run a background through the state licensing multiple boards, because if, for example, as an investigator, we're licensed in multiple states, so you have to qualify in each state and then jump through a lot of hoops to get such licensing. In nexus with the investigative license is the security license, especially in the state of New York. You've got your PI license and then your security license. The reason I mention all of this is perhaps I can be of some help to you and provide we can be of some help to you and provide some background on this as well, and then offer it to your listeners and our listeners. So I just want to mention that. I didn't mean to get off tangent, but I think it's important for people to know that if this is a legitimate security concern, private license, they've got to be licensed in each state that they do business. And if there's any irregularities, this will show some sort of, something more nefarious than just a regular security company. Sorry about that, Dave. I just want to bring that up.
That's okay. In fact, I would recommend that you start in Tennessee because they're headquartered in Memphis, although they have offices in Arkansas and Indiana, as I mentioned. So there are 5 offices, 3 states. Yeah, and so I found that to be unusual. I went to check out, who are these guys based on Marlon's photo, and I thought that was really interesting. But at the end of the day, guys, I didn't see anything that really jumped out at me in terms of this Central Defense Security, except for the fact that they don't promote themselves. They don't promote themselves. I mean, a 10-year-old could promote themselves better than what they do on their website. You go look on their website; it's a joke. If I wanted security services, I wouldn't hire them based on what I saw on the website. There simply wasn't there enough to go on, and that to me speaks to the word clandestine. And that's where I got suspicious. And now they're connected with this Walmart, and of course that got my attention as well. So what we're looking at here is one smoking gun. That's all, and that's all we have. We wouldn't have a lot, except Marlin has other things. Unmarked white vans that has been part of the extraction drills like the ones we saw in Fort Lauderdale on March 27th. We also has 2 pictures of big open bed trucks, long trucks, and they have shelving from inside the Walmart, shelving. Now, I find this to really be interesting, and the shelving is fascinating to me because the fact that they say they're doing plumbing, right? They're doing plumbing?
Right.
Well, then why would that necessitate taking out all the shelving of the store? And if you look at this photo that I'm going to publish, massive amounts of shelving. It's almost flowing over the truck. It's so massive. So clearly we can rule out, there might be plumbing going in there because they're full of crap with all their lies. Bottom line is, guys, is there's no real plumbing going on in there. They're totally retrofitting this store. And so what Marlin has done with these photos is he's made a very good case that all is not as it appears to be. But this is where it gets really interesting. About, 2.5, 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by someone, and they claimed to have an encrypted email and stuff. And listen, I don't know anything about this stuff, and he just said that he was part of a group that they bring in, and he said their jobs are highly compartmentalized. They work in government facilities primarily, and they come in, they do retrofits, they do adjustments, and he said that he'd been at the Midland Walmart, and he has been reading my stuff on my website. And he said, you're pretty close to on the mark. He said, but I've been inside that website a lot. And he says, I'm not going to give you my real name, but some of what he says substantiates what I already know, and then I'll take it a step further. What he said, let's call the guy Pete for the sake of argument, because I don't know his real name. But what he says is that he doesn't enter the store through a store entrance. He comes in through an underground entrance that has now been created. He said, and they want to keep this as on the QT as possible. He said they're forced to change clothes. That's for security reasons. They don't want any cell phone pictures, sneaking out of there. They have to sign these non-disclosure agreements with DHS. So, and I've heard this before when, the National Forest Service was closing up caves several years ago. One of my friends out here where I live, his brother was involved in this, and he described his work in a very similar compartmentalized fashion as to what I'm going to tell you here. He said, we'll typically go into a high-priority job, and he says, we'll do whatever, but we don't know the end result of the job because it's so compartmentalized. But he said a couple of things that he saw during the time that he was there got his attention. In each of the four corners, he said that he saw that under construction, and he did not know if they were going to make it permanently attached to the wall, but they had on rollers tall guard security towers that would reach all the way to the ceiling. And he said, what I don't know, because we weren't part of this, is would they attach these to the wall and they become like guards, lording over prisoners. And he also said that these they were caged, but he said they had openings and slats, and he said slats like you might find a .50 caliber machine gun. And those are his words, not mine. That was one of the things that he talked about. He also talked about the fact that they're soon going to be moving in heavy equipment, and he knew that because of the prep work they were doing on the inside. Well, where this gets corroborated is with Marlin's photos. The first photos he sent me was, he said they took a perfectly good road outside this Walmart, leading up to the store, and they were redoing it heavy-duty style. And so the two stories really match. So what we have here with these two guys, we've heard the rumors about the tunnels. If this guy, this unnamed source, is accurate, he enters through a tunnel. high security tunnel. And so that part, what we're seeing on the net, I think it's probably true. I would certainly like to get more information on it before, I put my credibility on the line and say I know this is absolutely true, because I don't. The other thing, guys, that really concerned me was what he saw when he was inside. He said when he was inside, he saw people with DHS badges and UN badges. And I said, I never heard the UN ever had badges. I wrote him back and said that. I said, I didn't know that they ever did that. And he said, unless UN stands for something else, he said, it was spelled out. He said, it said United Nations, UN. And so DHS and he said UN were part of this on the inside. And I said, well, how many people, and I wrote him back some questions, and he answered most of them. And one of the questions I asked, well, how many people would you see in there at any given time? And he said anywhere between 50 and maybe 300. He said sometimes they were just doing intense stuff, and it was like watching people on an assembly line work. Each had their own function. Each was diligently at work. And he says it was crowded, it was noisy, and he said they were doing major overhaul of the store. They were tearing up parts of the floor. He said all the shelving was out, and see, there's more collaboration with Marlon's photos of the shelving leaving Walmart in the back of these big flatbed trucks. So what this is, we could speculate on, but I'm confident that this unnamed source said enough things that match what I have photographic evidence for that we can start drawing some conclusions. But the other thing that really gets me, and what I started off, our interview with, is have you ever seen people videotaped and photographed recently going into these Walmarts? And I haven't. And this, to me, lends more credibility to the fact that they have indeed built service entry tunnels into these Walmarts so they can disguise or cover up who's going in there and what they're really up to. So that doesn't really tell us what the Walmarts are for. I had a Texas Ranger say that they were going to be supply for the military and local law enforcement with weapons because they expected more ISIS incursions after the Garland event. And he said he doesn't believe it was going to be FEMA camp detention related. But if you're seeing 4 towers in the 4 corners of the store that look like they might become permanently attached to the wall, you have to ask yourself, why would you need that inside a supply depot?
That's very true. Now you're talking about, and we've seen these surveillance towers before used out in the open. I think New York City, and in fact, InfoWars, I think had a couple of images or some video. But we know what you're talking about. Of course, it's rather disturbing. I mean, if this information is accurate, it's rather disturbing. Just want to say this about the United Nations badges. The United Nations does have a civilian and a military, it's probably not the right term, police force, okay, civilian and military, as well as security, internal security. And there are badges for all 3 that look pretty similar. I just want to mention that. So they do exist. But, wow, okay. So Walmart access by tunnels. What's the deal with changing the clothes? You mentioned that. What's up with that?
He said that when he went into work, that he would go in his regular clothes, and they would change into jumpsuits, like what you see airline workers in, the airline mechanics. And that's how he described it. One color. He said almost like prison garb. He said we look like airline employees or prisoners, and so I kind of imagine a multicolor. I don't have a picture of it, but I imagine a multicolor pants matched top. But he said that was done obviously for security. He said that's not unusual. The other thing that I know about this is my friend out here where I live, and we were partners in fighting against McCain's attempted grab of our land. When his brother was doing this work. Like they were closing up caves and trails on national park trails. They also, if they went inside the cave, he said that they changed clothes twice. And he said for similar reasons, they wanted no photos. And he said that inside some of these caves, they had very heavy equipment. And I don't want to take too much of a detour here, but I heard the protocols of these cave closings to such a degree that when I heard, when I was reading this guy's email, and I'm looking at what he's saying, I'm thinking, I've seen this before. I've heard this before. I know this is probably pretty accurate.
Oh, man. How many people are we talking? Any indication about how many workers there would be inside the Walmart?
I asked him that, and what he mentioned was on any given day, he said there could be 50 estimated, could be as many as he thought 300. He said some days it was pretty crowded and it looked like a busy factory.
All right, and 24/7 or just specific shifts, or we don't know?
He never indicated that, and I didn't think to ask him whether it was. But you know what? I'm going to make a wild guess here. I would bet it's 24/7.
Yeah, it sounds like that. What about the observation? I mean, if given the fact that Walmarts usually have a pretty expansive parking area and even a delivery area to the rear, what about people driving by? Wouldn't they see activity within the store itself through the windows, perhaps, or would there be window coverings or?
Not on the photos I've seen, nothing exposed that you could see. Okay. Walmart, or whoever's running Walmart, is probably the more accurate thing to say. In the California store that I mentioned that stayed open for filling prescriptions, this one video that was taken, and it was, you walk in and you have shelves going up to 15 feet. You can't see up and around. They didn't want you to see anything. And I'm probably going to run that video down again and rerun it with this story because it's very telling. They don't want you to know what's going on the inside. And I've talked to a number of people in Midland who have gone up and they've taken photos on their phone, and some of the security has harassed them, tried to seize their phones. So it's a very protective atmosphere. But I find it interesting that they're using a civilian contractor for security. I mean, Doug, this is supposed to be for plumbing. Where have you ever seen a store, first of all, closed for 6 months over plumbing? You could keep the store open and just work on the bathrooms and provide something temporary and not lose all that revenue. But then you've got civilian contracted security companies in there hauling out of shelves. There's no mistaking what we're seeing in the photographs that Marlon sent me. It's anything but plumbing is going on inside this Midland Walmart store. And I've gotten similar stories, but I kind of treated them like rumors because they lack substantial proof. But here I've got a named source taking photos whose photos match a lot of what I'm being told by someone who claims to have been on the inside. By the way, he will not be back on the inside again. He said his task is finished.
Oh, okay.
Any chance they're reopening the Walmarts?
As FEMA camps? Yeah, I don't know. Welcome Walmart shoppers, The greeters won't look the same. They'll be considerably younger, and they'll be armed to the teeth. That's what I think we're looking at here, and I think this Texas Ranger who I had a dialogue with, I think he's in error. I think these are going to be processing centers for FEMA camps. There was, I saw a video this morning, and I'm going to have to try to backtrack it down. I want to say it was in Ohio. Walmart had been closed for a couple of years, and they put barbed wire on it, and the barbed wire faced in, and it was the most expensive barbed wire you could use. And there were the train tracks that ran by the Walmart, very close. And this guy showed aerial photos. I think they were Google Earth map photos. It was pretty telling, and I looked at that and I said, this kind of gives us a clue as to what they might be thinking at the Walmart in Midland. And with all the attention they've gotten for the Walmarts, usually when you shine the light of day on these boogers, they usually go away. But they don't seem to be deterred because these Walmart activities just continue. Another thing that I've seen too, and I wish I would have cataloged these better, guys, because I wasn't planning to write a story like this until Marlon approached me, and then I had the unnamed source come forward. But there was another series of pictures taken of Walmarts in Vegas, and they had an unusually high number of security cameras on the roof. And I thought that was unusual, and one of the Walmarts was closing. And I'm thinking, why would you be adding security cameras to a Walmart that's supposedly going to be closed?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. But we see these kind of anomalies connected with Jade Helm all over the place. It's my belief, and I'm going to walk you guys through this, it's my belief that Guantanamo will be the home of many political dissidents. And here's why I believe this. In late, about mid-April, I was contacted by several people connected by family, wives, brothers, and sometimes the soldiers themselves. They were part of the Michigan Army Reservists, and then later the National Guard from Michigan joined in, and I even heard from the New York National Guard in upstate New York on this topic. And I would assume these guys are here now because beginning in late May to June, they were going to be training at this place called Camp Grayling. And Camp Grayling, a long time, is on all the FEMA camp maps on the Internet, and it has a very disturbing reputation. So they're going to be training there, and they were told they were training for Guantanamo duty, for Guantanamo security. And they were also told that they were going to be going to Guantanamo to complete their training. Well, here's the problem I have with this. By itself, that doesn't mean a lot, except like a lot of the people pointed out, many of these personnel are not security personnel. They're being converted. So in other words, they're increasing the ranks of the security guards that will be capable of going to Guantanamo to provide security. But here's the problem, guys. I have a DNI report. It's dated, I think it's early April. Obama, in the first 3 months of this year, released 116 terrorists. Some of them outright released. Some of them were transferred to mainland prisons. But he's cleaned out a lot of the terrorists that are in Guantanamo, and he's making good on his promise to close Guantanamo as a terrorist detention facility. So in a time when the government is scaling down Guantanamo population, why are they training more guards to go to Guantanamo? And if you consider Jade Helm, and I'll develop this idea here, Jade Helm is about political dissident extraction. There's no question, because they're dropping in the middle of the night, rappelling in, coming in, hiding out, being in civilian clothes, but they're bringing in special forces. Special forces have specific functions. They're not combat troops. They go in before an invasion, or in this case, I think before martial law, and they're trained to do destruction of command and control like radar facilities and so forth, but they also include in their duties high-valued target extractions or assassinations. And so when you see Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Army Rangers, all part of these drills, they're telling you right there just by the troops that they're using what they're up to. So they're going to be doing extractions, and then we combine that with what I know is going on in Michigan with the training of those personnel. That's why I've reached the conclusion that I think Guantanamo is going to play home to people like the Hagmans and Hodges.
Interesting. And just so folks know, at its peak back in 2003, Guantanamo held nearly 700 prisoners, and ultimately more than 500 were released under Bush, and I think, another, another 100 or so, or I think you had mentioned the number that were released under Obama, and it's kind of like an empty shell there at Camp Delta. Interesting.
And what I've seen also is that the Department of Defense has released new guidelines and new practices on civilian contractors, and have been hiring new civilian contractors by the bulk, and they seemingly have no assignment, but they have rules for contractors in civil operations that have been released, and that's definitely kind of concerning.
Yeah, and that verifies that verifies what Dave is saying, and wow, I mean, this is a lot to take in, and people are probably going to already throw stones at us for even talking about Walmart, bringing Walmart into the equation, saying, oh, how far out in left field do you have to be, to think this crazy conspiracy nonsense up? But it's, isn't it interesting?
Years ago, I'd be laughing at us too.
Yeah, and I'm not, and
I understand that, except, let's just forget unnamed sources on the inside.
Right.
Let's just look at people like Marlon Brock's photos that I'll have up on my website tomorrow, hauling away all the shelving in a store that's only supposed to be closed to do plumbing. The use of a private contractor that's marketing is very under the radar, shall we say, and they admit the government's one of their clients, but although they have Fortune 100 clients, they don't mention one of them for marketing purposes. It's hard not to be suspicious when you see these. Yeah, and why all the Walmarts for the same reasons at the same time? I mean, that doesn't make any sense either.
I learned
how many do we want to buy?
It takes 8 to 18 weeks to build Walmarts after the foundation is poured, but yet they're going to be closing for plumbing issues for over 6 months, these Walmarts. And the net loss of the profits will be over $150 million during this 6 months.
Interesting.
Well, but they're not losing money. I guarantee you.
No.
Have the smoking gun proof? No. But we know that Walmart has partnered with DHS. Remember, hi, I'm Janet Napolitano. If you see something, say something. Remember that?
Yeah, that was. I was going to add. What do you make of that? Their inaugural DHS, welcoming system, using Walmart as the inaugural location. That's always bothered me. It really has.
Well, Walmart has, and this is common knowledge now, and this is something that I don't get challenged on at all when I have said that Walmart, their logistics match the military, and this was done intentionally several years ago. So in time of war, they could do a peacetime to wartime conversion, just like we saw in World War II,
right,
where you make cars and now you make tanks. That part doesn't even bother me that much, but Walmart's locked in. They're not losing any money on this. Obama's having the Federal Reserve crank up the printing presses, and they're throwing money at the Walmart people left and right. There's no question about that.
That's true. Their tax subsidies are over $7 billion, I think, $8 billion a year alone, besides the fact that they're probably getting under the table financial help, as you're alluding to.
What if they're building a factory? Let me really get out in left field here, okay? But I'm on pretty solid historical ground, and current events in China reflect some possibility for what I'm going to say. So let me put the Hodges hypothesis out here. We know that in China, and I'll start with this point, we know in China from a HBO documentary about 10, 12 years ago, and a lot of follow-up journalism, that they have slave labor for Walmart, de facto slave labor. Yes, they pay the workers a wage, but they require most of them to live in these dormitories, or if you don't live there, you've still got to pay for the dormitory as if you live there. And the price of all the living expenses, when you total them up, equal more than what you get paid as a Walmart employee. So therefore, by definition, you have de facto slavery, Chinese slave labor, courtesy of Walmart. So keep that point in mind just for a second. And let's just look at historical precedent. We know for a fact that many despots through history, and Hitler's probably the most notable example, would take their political prisoners and make them work on their war machine as they systematically starve them to death over time. Let's look at the Walmarts. Is it really, when we look at these two facts, is it really that far-fetched to wonder to yourself? I'm not printing it, I'm just wondering it, but is it that far-fetched to say that this could be the beginning of conversions of places like Walmart to factories where they'll use slave labor. And let me put the lid on this hypothesis. Executive Order 13603. Obama implemented this in 2011, and basically this is total presidential control over everything. In fact, after the show, if you want to read the details of this is worse than the NDAA, in my opinion. 13603. You can go to my website and look it up. This is absolutely phenomenal, guys. Sections 501 and 601 talk about the use of conscripted labor. They say they're going to have two conscripts. One is obviously for the military, and the second is civilian. And in these two sections, they talk about the use of something they call a consultant, which is an expert in their field that does invaluable work, and consultants will not be paid. I'm not interpreting the language. That's exactly what it says. That is slave labor by definition. So we can't consider everything that we're seeing in current events in isolation. We have to consider them in the context of which laws or executive orders have been passed that would serve to support hypotheses which predict the direction this is headed. So when I throw those three things into the mix, I have a hard time believing that we're not going to see slave labor in this country, and it would not surprise me if Walmart wasn't at the forefront of it.
Yeah, why bother with an executive order such as that if you don't intend at some point in time, or if you're not planning for the eventuality, even as remote as it might be, to use it. I certainly, and why then, for example, why at 2011? Interesting timing, interesting information. Wow.
Well, I'm sure that I'm going to get a lot of, this can't be true kind of emails, and that's fine. I mean, to do this work, you've got to develop thick skin. But also when you do this work, as you guys know all too well, once you've covered the globalists and how they operate, you've kind of got their playbook. And if you know a couple of things that they're doing, it's not terribly difficult to predict the direction that they're going to take things. And this is what I feel that we're looking at right here. I don't think this is command and control for weapons distributions, which is what a lot of people think. And at one time I thought that too. From what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, I think this is good old-fashioned detention city.
Wow. To hear that, Dave, regardless if it was Walmart, Kmart, whatever mart, it doesn't matter. Just to hear that, very troubling indeed. I mean, we're seeing the offensive against political dissidents. I mean, at the beginning of the show, I was talking about censorship and how, for example, anything that's critical of the current regime is somewhat censored through algorithms on the internet, and that's proven. So, I mean, is it such a great leap to say that, look, voicing dissident opinions against this regime could land you in some sort of state of nothingness. Well, hey, they did it with Al Qaeda. They did it with the Taliban. They did it with so-called terrorists. Held 14, 15 years without any charges.
Well, yeah, look at what they have beta tested over in the Middle East. And I say beta tested for a reason because I think it's what they plan to do here. Let me tell you just how bad it'll get. And another thing that serves to support my notion that we're going to see slave labor camps on our soil, back in the H1N1 scare 5-6 years ago, and I'm sure you guys remember that, I had two friends fairly high up in Colorado law enforcement and various agencies that participated in the DHS-assisted roadblocks. And they were run a lot like DUI roadblocks, and they'd have the chase cars and all that stuff. But it wasn't about checking for sobriety. What they do is in the drill, and they used actors, they'd pull the people over, and they would say, have you had your vaccination for H1N1? And if you hadn't, they'd give you a chance to do it there. And then if you refused, they would take your family. So let's say you had mom, dad, and boy and girl, and what they would do is they'd say, okay, that's fine, and they'd have these buses, these prison buses there. And actually at that time they said Wackenhut. I don't know if Wackenhut's still around. And they would put the men in one bus, the women in another, and the children in yet another, with the presumption that they would send these three groups to three different camps where they'd be medically isolated. Now, Greg Evenson was on my show during that time frame, and for those that don't know, Greg was a highly decorated Kansas State patrolman, and he knew all about this. I talked to him off the air, and then he came on. We discussed this on my show, and he said, yeah, this is exactly what they'll plan to do. And if you go back and you put all these things together and start connecting these dots, it all adds up to forced detention, NDAA included. There's dot number 5. And I believe we're going to see civilian slave labor under the direction of Obama. And again, I say Executive Order 13603. I have a search engine bar at the top of my webpage after the show. Go there and put that in. I've written, probably 5, 6, 7 articles on this covering various aspects of this. Under this Executive Order 2, everything that you own, you don't own. They can take your home. They can take your personal possessions. They own all manufacturing, all water. Of course, they just took care of that recently. All food production and food, anything to make food, food processing, everything. I mean, you think of anything that's nailed down and not nailed down in the country, 13603 takes it. It's the most draconian thing that Obama has put out there legislatively. It's worse than the NDAA, but it's way worse than the NDAA because they can do anything to you.
Wow. Yeah.
And the timing of this, we see that Jade Helm is not supposed to start until July, I believe, but we see reports that it's already been ongoing.
Oh, yeah.
It's more expansive than what they had initially put out in their PDF release. I'm not sure how many states it originally encompasses, but I'm hearing, Florida, Tennessee, Ohio, Michigan.
All the states, Joe.
Yeah, I mean it's much more expansive than they originally thought, and I'm hearing a lot of speculation too about cyber attacks and what the effect of these cyber attacks can have. And I remember at the beginning of the year they called 2015 the year of the hack, and what kind of event do you think we'd have to see in America to bring about what they are preparing for or what they want to have happen? Could it be a cyber attack? Would it have to be
let me start one level above it. Okay, here's the question I get asked a lot. Is Jade Helm going to go live or is it just a drill? And this is what I've come to the conclusion of. Jade Helm could go live if there is a precipitating series of false flag attacks because they'd have everything they need to go right into action, be like a snap military drill. What I do think is likely under the present circumstances, unless anything dramatic happens, is that Jade Helm is the beta test, and they're positioning their assets for Jade Helm's follow-up to do it. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of merit to doing this, too. If you get the people to appear to cry wolf over and over and over, Jade Helm, martial law, run for your lives, and nothing happens and Jade Helm is disbanded in September, then people in the independent media lose a lot of credibility in people who are looking in from the outside who regularly watch Wolf Blitzer and Fox and Friends. So there's an advantage for them to run this and beta test it, but not have it really go live to cause all the naysayers out there to lose credibility. But let's just ask the $64 million question. Why would they spend all these resources, time and money, all this extensive planning, and not plan someday to use this?
Well,
they're clearly doing this for a reason.
Exactly. And I'm right there with you. Nothing may happen during that so-called time period, Dave, and that'll leave a lot of people who are saying, this will happen with egg on their face, or at least seemingly so, until it does go live.
And Joe mentioned something I think is pretty telling, too, about the cyber attacks. Joe, that's on my top 3. When I predict what's going to happen, whatever's going to happen is going to be economic. I'm firmly convinced of that. When this whole mess goes down, whether it's Jade Helm 15 or Jade Helm 16.5, whenever it goes down, I believe it's going to be economic. Now, the form it takes, it could be natural. I mean, we've got an $18 trillion deficit, $240 trillion unfunded liabilities, and at least a 1.5 quadrillion credit swap derivatives debt with a $505 trillion interest rate that we have no chance of paying off. That could cause a natural death. And we know that in November, I believe it was November 10th, Janet Yellen and Mark Carney and a bunch of other Federal Reserve officials and banking officials from London got together in London and did simulated bank failure drills. And one of the premises was a cyber attack, and it was November 10th of last year. So they clearly are planning something. Something's happened. They're working. In fact, 6 days later, after these drills were conducted in Brisbane, Australia, at the G20 conference, that's when the G20 nations came out and said, well, you know that money you have in the bank, it's really not money. It's an unsecured deposit. And as far as the FDIC is concerned, you go to the end of the line to get compensated if a bank fails. And then that basically tells you they're going to steal your money.
Right.
That's what I started writing articles saying, get your money out of the bank while you can. Oh, and isn't it interesting? Who was it? Haysbert? Who's the guy that's the former speaker that was just indicted?
Hassert.
Yeah, you did. Boy, was that. Do you know what he was indicted for?
Structuring.
Yeah. He wasn't indicted for having sex with a minor when he was a wrestling coach. He was indicted for taking bribe money out of his own bank account and paying this person off. By the way, that is illegal to facilitate a bribe, but that's not what they got him on. What they got him on was taking out more than, $9,000 a month in cash. So you think that money in the bank belongs to you? In fact, I should probably rerun that article for the good of our audience, because when we're done talking tonight, no one's going to be leaving much money in the bank. Just leave enough to pay your bills on a monthly basis. But you got to be careful how you take it out, because you could go to jail. So they're going to steal our money. There's clear signs they're going to make moves on RIAs and pensions. Secretary Lew of the Treasury Department's already moved on some of the federal pensions and has put them in, I would call it, protective custody. He did that a little over a year ago. So they're clearly going to wipe out everything that you have, everything that you've worked for. And by the way, let me give a shameless plug here for my friend Steve Quayle. If you think that your money is safe in keeping it in cash, the American dollar, that's foolish. You need to have gold, silver, precious coins that you can touch. Now, I'm not making money off this, but my friend Steve Quayle from Renaissance, they do this. Steve does this work. He's done it for a long time. And you need to get out of cash and you need to get into metals, because if you survive the collapse era and you emerge into the post-collapse era, you're going to need something that you can use for currency, and it's going to be gold and silver. In fact, Doug, let me just address this. I know I've digressed a little bit, but let me address this just briefly here, because this is so important. Back in April of 2014, Goldman Sachs did an order to its brokers to say that tell your clients that gold's going to belly up and they're going to lose their backside and they better sell. So people start selling short. And who was waiting on the other end? The global elite. They were buying up all the gold at bargain basement prices. That action right there convinced me at that time to start moving my money out of the bank into other things that I could use in a post-collapse America, or what's left of America. So all the signs are on the wall now. So, Doug, back to your point about will it be an economic collapse like a cyber attack? Yeah, I think that's possible. The other thing that concerns me along these lines about false flag terrorism that could set this whole thing off is at one time I thought we only had one ISIS base camp 8 miles from El Paso, as revealed by the discovery of Judicial Watch, and they found a document, and then they had two primary sources that confirmed the document. But I've got sources now that tell me there is a second ISIS base camp. And what I suspect is going to happen is the scenario I see is you have an economic collapse, and under that chaos and the martial law crackdown, here comes ISIS to add to the chaos exponentially and further validate the need for martial law and to get the public to accept it. ISIS has been training with the Sinaloas, and I've got this from a reliable DEA source who I believe will be going public before the end of the summer. I've told him you may not have until the end of the summer, but ISIS trains with the Sinaloas, the Juarez, and the Tijuana cartels in a place outside San Salvador and several base camps there that are maintained by a drug cartel out of Peru run by the Peruvian Army and the Peruvian National Bank, and they're called the Sanchez Paredes, and they are the world's biggest drug dealers now. When Pablo Escobar was deposed, they assumed that role. They're connected heavily with Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East, and they import arms. It's a big drug corridor. So we have two paramilitary camps run by ISIS in conjunction with the Sinaloas, according to the Judicial Watch document, that are poised to come across the border. Now, I don't think they can take on the U.S. military in open combat and experience success, but they sure as heck, in a moment of chaos, can come across the border and attack high-priority targets. They can also take over police stations of small towns. They can execute political leaders in a town. I mean, the chaos that could be coming from this is amazing. And what I find unacceptable from the traitor that resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is he's willing to risk war with Russia by chasing ISIS into Syria, and that could bring Russia into the conflict. But he won't even go across the border 3 miles into Mexico and take down an ISIS base camp that we all know is there. And we know, and I've documented this in a previous article last week, that ISIS has made substantial gains in trying to secure nuclear weapons, including the Pakistani government. I don't know if ISIS has nuclear weapons yet. I think it's only a matter of time, and God help us, because, Joe, if we're going to have a collapse, I pray it would just be economic, but an exacerbating effect, maybe you let off 3 or 4 nuclear bombs.
Yeah, and I've heard.
In fact, I'll develop this idea a little further. I'll even name a city that I believe would be at the top of the target list, and I've been saying this for 3 years. Rahm Emanuel, why would he leave a senior White House position to go be the mayor of the most corrupt city in America, the government-wise? And that made no sense to me, except Rahm Emanuel, like father, like son, he's got Mossad connections. And there was a gentleman named Jeff Joe Black. And back in 2012, I believe it was, Jeff approached Annie and I and wanted to come on the show and reveal Rahm Emanuel's connections to the Mossad and how he felt he was put in place to facilitate a terrorist attack of a nuclear nature upon the city of Chicago. Now, this got my attention because when they had a NATO conference earlier that year in May of 2012, they practiced this on the south side of Chicago, and Annie reported in her news around the same time that Gary, Indiana, was complaining to the federal government that they were being forced to house 400,000 FEMA coffins without compensation. And so all of a sudden this started making sense to me. So I started a dialogue with him, and he'd call me one day and call Annie the next, and we had several conversations. And the week before Jeff was scheduled to come on, he got a hold of me and says, Dave, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going into hiding. I'm going to Canada. I'm going to hide out. I've been threatened within an inch of my life. Well, that's not the end of the story. He resurfaces again in 2013, and he reaches out immediately to Annie and I and wants to come back on the show. Well, I had a guest that following Sunday, so I said, okay. I said, we'll clear some time for you the following Sunday. Well, I didn't hear from him. The show date comes and goes, and then someone sent me an article from a Pennsylvania newspaper that said that Jeff Joe Black had fallen to his death off of a bridge, and the death was being investigated as a homicide. And when I started connecting all these dots, and Jeff had some real damning things about Rahm Emanuel's connection into the nuclear inner circle, this is stuff he was going to reveal on the show, and I can see why they terminated him. This was damning. And now I look at the ISIS threat. We have well-documented attempts where they've tried to procure nuclear weapons. You got Rahm Emanuel still in charge. You got the cover-up with the murder of Jeff Joe Black. You know, Joe, I hope it is just a cyber attack if it comes to that, but my fear is it's going to be a lot more.
Yeah, I hope you're wrong, and but I do agree there's more to what is coming down the pike this year than I think any of us can really not understand, but fathom at this moment as things continue to block by block be taken apart. But we're up against our first commercial break. We're going to take that now. Folks, you're listening to Dave Hodges on the Hagmann Hagmann Report. This is Monday, June 1st, 2015. His website is thecommonsenseshow.com. And go back and listen. Our guest tonight is Dave Hodges. His website is The Common Sense Show. Quick note, there's an article up on his site, Jade Helm, Official Reveals True Purpose of JH15. And as it says in the headline, this is a must-read. It is a must-read, and it's some of what we went over in the first hour. Dave, I want to open up with a question. How much of this Jade Helm, let's say they're preparing for something truly to happen, whatever it is. We'll say it's the economic and a subsequent terrorist attack. How much of this do you think is a contingency of government
continuity
of government operation versus
I think
some
it's
kind
really tied continuity of government, Joe. I think they're scared to death of us. They realize that more people are waking up. We're becoming more united. You know what's interesting is you look at the Common Sense Show, you look at SteveQuayle.com, InfoWars, Caravan to Midnight. We all get along. We all have a common purpose. It's kind of like Ben Franklin said, we either hang together or we'll hang separately. And if you look at the mainstream media, they don't get along. They fight all the time, all kinds of infighting, nefarious things going on. And I think this unity that we have, this solidarity that's growing, is scaring the crap out of these people, and this is how they're responding. And by the way, there are stories now leaking that Obama thought about using the military to suppress the Bundy protesters. They view us as foreign aliens in our own land. They refer to us legally as domestic terrorists via the MIAC report. So if you believe in God and read the Bible and voted for Ron Paul and you think there should be a First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fifth Amendment, then you're a domestic terrorist. So they're scared to death of us, and I'm glad they're scared of us. I want them to be afraid of us, but we need to be prepared what comes as a result of that fear. And that fear could bring a pretty dramatic crackdown, and I think it could happen pretty quickly. I wanted to bring something up real quick here. You mentioned Katie, my health reporter, Katie Whalen. Katie just told me that we're not going out over the net right now on this broadcast. She said that the phone option's available. I hope this is not true, but we might want to try to confirm that. This is exactly what happened to me when I interviewed Scott Bennett, former Army PSYOP Special Operations Officer, who had the chapter and verse of how the CIA, and he had the funders, he had the names of the accounts and the Swiss bank accounts. This happened to us. We had Scott on, and they took every form of communication off our satellite except for the listen by phone and the archives. So let's hope that's not happening.
Let me do this. As you're talking, let me verify this. I can here. I'm looking. The monitor we have right now shows us live and broadcasting via the internet through multiple venues. Now, let me just, I'll do another thing here to make sure. It could be a geographical issue. It could be, something else, but outside of here. But boy, that's troubling. But see, censorship though. I mean, regardless, we've got the archive and backups of the archive, so people will hear this show regardless. Period. I mean, end of story. But having said all of that, Dave, I mean, I have never seen so much censorship in all of my life in terms of the alternative media being really hammered. I mean, your site, it's unbelievable what how they're these algorithms that they use to push down the information. Oh, my goodness.
Well, Annie Briso, my news director, just chimed in, and she said, Dave, you've been down since the first minute of the show. The phone line is full.
Okay. All right. This is interesting. Yeah, our monitors are telling us something different. Well, go ahead, Dave. And what I'm going to do in the interim here is I'm going to step into my office and see if I can do something to take us, to flip us into a different realm, so to speak. So you guys, Joe, you go ahead and talk, and I'll be right back.
Okay. Joe, let me mention a great American. His name is Jeff Barber. He's a 63-year-old Texas resident, and he lives near El Paso, Texas. And he was hearing stories about a 47-mile open border, and that's not too far from where the ISIS base camp is located. And it's interesting that he took matters into his own hands, and he went out and he drove up and down and back and forth in these 47 miles and didn't find one Border Patrol agent. And there's a pedestrian bridge. He sent me a photo of, an aerial photo of, that crosses over the Rio Grande into Texas, and he's got a picture of that, and he said that that's been used as a drug corridor, and he went on to say that there was a teacher that actually discovered this particular bridge, and they never found the teacher's body, just his head.
Wow.
So, yeah, pretty interesting here. So 47 miles adjacent to the ISIS base camp that we know of, and I've been told 10 miles away there's another one. So they have free reign to run across the country. In fact, in the Judicial Watch document that they uncovered from the Mexican government, what they have is confirmation that the Sinaloas were using their coyotes to come into this country and do intel surveillance for ISIS, for high-priority targets. And
that's interesting. I just read that, not really unrelated about ISIS, but that 2,300 Humvees, U.S. Humvees, had been stole by ISIS from Iraq in the Middle East. And they just appear...
the word stole to given by the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what it looks like here. Again, the Iraqis continue to run. The Iraqi trained the U.S. trained Iraqi military has been running away from ISIS every chance they get, and giving up territory, seceding territory, instead of them winning, battles for this territory. But it's being played around in our media as though they're, just taking over the Middle East. And I understand, the social media and the way that they're propagandizing this. It is that I believe they said that, I don't know how many people are sympathizers in the West, but that they're growing on a daily basis. And this is a much more sophisticated campaign. Or we had Al Qaeda that laid below the radar until 9/11, really, and we all know the problems with that. But now this is a very public, very out in the open thing. And the Mexican base, you said that there was potentially 2 ISIS bases in Mexico, just south of the southern border. One 10 miles away from the one that was reported by Judicial Watch not too long ago.
Sources. Now, the Judicial Watch report only names the one, which is 3 miles on the other side of the border, 8 miles from El Paso. Let me read to you a little bit here from the Barber report. He said that the reason he went on this trek is he had talked to a Border Patrol agent, and he says, he told me there was a 75% reduction in field staffing in East County, the open border zone as it's called. The correct answer from our research is that there's 100% stand down of Border Patrol agents now. And he went on to talk about the records he was able to dredge up, And he said when they arrest people, he said they categorize them as Mexicans or OTMs, other than Mexican. And he said here are some of the countries that they have caught people in this particular area in when they were actually bothering to do border enforcement: Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, and Turkey. I don't think most of those countries are very fond of the United States. And you have to wonder, why would they be coming through our southern border? Well, I can tell you how they got there. They're part of the terrorist network that starts with the Muslim Brotherhood, who, by the way, President Obama's half-brother Malik Obama is the head of finance and arms procurement. They come across the Atlantic. They are with the Sanchez Paredes drug cartel. They're taken to San Salvador, where they're linked up with the drug cartels doing paramilitary training, and then they're brought up to near the border to these camps, and then they're released across the border. And in fact, we're doing this formally to ourselves, and I'm sure you're aware of the refugee resettlement program that's drawn so much attention in the media recently, where 9,000 Syrians were resettled in Idaho, and the FBI came out and in print actually admitted they didn't, quote, have time to screen these particular immigrants. It's a prescription for disaster.
Absolutely. I mean, is this something that, what do they hope to accomplish with this? To have their people in place in this time of panic, collapse, in this time of when things go awry, that they will have a not like a DHS civilian army, but a counterforce, or are these?
Yeah, a fifth column insurgency force that's sleeper cell oriented. That's what I believe we're looking at. In fact, this even parallels what I reported on last summer during the OTM invasion of Central Americans into this country, which started last June. I talked about the fact that they were letting in MS-13 by the droves. I was contacted. Well, this is an interesting story. I'm going to San Diego on vacation. We stop at a convenience store in Yuma, and there's a Border Patrol agent in there. Now, remember, this is at the height of when the things are breaking loose, and everyone's concerned about Ebola and bringing diseases across the border. So I went up to him, and I said, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about the border. And he goes, sure, I got a minute. And I said, well, I want to tell you, first of all, I'm a journalist, but I will not use your name or mention where I interviewed you at in the short term. And he goes, fine. And so he was really upset. The Border Patrol was furious because they were being exposed to all these pathogens where they even had to launder their clothes at work so as not to take it home to their family. Some of these Border Patrol agents caught drug-resistant TB, scabies. You mentioned it. It was there. The only thing I didn't hear that they got was Ebola. So he told me that they were arresting MS-13, and he says you can tell them by their tattoos. They have teardrops on their face for the people that they murder. And he said we were told to hold them until there were 7 or 8 or 10 of them and then to release them. And he said this was unconscionable to all of us. And he told me that on first meeting. Well, I gave him my card, and I said, well, if you come across anything else and want to be a confidential source, I'll protect your identity. Well, he did, and not only did he, so did one of his colleagues. So I started a dialogue last summer with these 2 Border Patrol agents, and the stuff they were telling me about MS-13, I did not know. You will not read this in the press. MS-13 is morphed from being a street gang, and they are now the official hitmen for the Sinaloa drug cartel. So if you need a police chief killed, this is who you send in. And these people were being sent en masse in small packs of 8 to 10 into our country last summer. And I wrote about this last summer. I said this is a 5th column insurgency force. And I said there's no question what's going on here. Now with this refugee resettlement program, and we're being overrun by tens of thousands of people, 92% of them, according to government statistics, are Muslims, we're being overrun. So I also think not only are we looking at sleeper cells, but probably the majority of these people don't pose any direct physical threat to the United States, but it's about deculturizing. It's about the introduction of Sharia law. It's about taking away the Constitution and replacing it with something else. And this is stuff that I just find unacceptable. I don't care what religion someone is, Joe. I don't care if someone wants to pray to Muhammad or to Allah. It doesn't matter to me what a man's religion is until they tell me what my religion can't be, and they try to tell me that I can't obey the laws of my own nation. That's when I start saying, okay, enough's enough.
Amazing. I'm back, by the way, Dave, and I did hear that. That's amazing. And you've done a lot of work on MS-13.
Yeah,
man,
he has. I know he's talked a lot about it here on the show.
Well, we've got. I mean, MS-13. The gangs are pretty much throughout the country. The gang MS-13 is pretty much throughout the country, every major city.
And I remember the documents from the Sinaloa drug cartel that Dave refers to, where it talked about the government working with them in exchange for busting rival cartels and rival business. They would let them operate freely in the United States and help them get their drugs across the border. This was a government-issued document from years ago, and it's no secret.
And Dave, this goes back to, and Joe, this goes back to the Mena, Arkansas. You know, the drug running operations. Tosh Plumley. Barry Seal, for example. The players.
Hillary's first big corporate adventure.
It's funny how that name keeps coming up, or that surname Clinton surname keeps coming up. Interesting. Yeah, it's also interesting too when you mention MS-13 and drugs in the same paragraph or even the same sentence. How we look at this and people don't know this, but the CIA. I mean, a lot of people don't know this. They suspect this, but the CIA is running drugs all of the time and actually siding with the various producers of cocaine, for example, and putting markers in the components or the ingredients of the cocaine. When I say markers, I'm talking about things. I don't know how you make it, but they'll put markers in to make sure their cocaine is getting through, as opposed to their opponents or their opposition. And it's big business. It really is. It's and of course that funds the black ops budgets that we don't see or hear about. My goodness, wow.
Well,
okay.
It goes back to people say, oh, that's not going on, that can't happen. And this has been going on at least since Zapata oil in the late 1950s, early 60s. And then you had Air America. And these are just the things that we find out about. I mean, Lord knows how much they're doing behind the scenes that we never hear about.
Exactly. And that's why, Dave, I love talking to you because you've got such a rich knowledge of history and of history that is not necessarily in the history books, but the real history that's been redacted and censored from our from purview. And so you have the basis of understanding of what's really taking place, and I really appreciate that because I like to look back to see how we got where we're at, look at the bigger picture, and it's pretty simple. I mean, once you're filled in and informed, you can see exactly where we're at, why we're here, how we got here, and then you can extrapolate from there where we're headed. And you do that so well as an investigative reporter, journalist, and talk show host. And I'm not just blowing smoke either. I mean, that's an honest compliment. And you had mentioned earlier about how the alternative media gets along. I just want to say this. And I think Ted Broer, who you had on as a guest and we have on frequently, mentioned this. I think you mentioned the tipping point when the entirety of a population reaches, I think, 10% being informed, and the blowback by the people in power. They've got to do something. That 10%. Did you say that?
Right. This came out of SNARC, SNARC. It's an acronym, and I don't recall what it is without my notes in front of me. But they're a social psychology research outfit, and they've looked at things like the tipping point, and they're trying to answer questions along the lines about how change happens. And in a society, what they found, and it doesn't really matter the society, it can be material, non-material, high-tech, low-tech, first world, third world, they found that when 10% of the people are firmly committed to an ideal, then that notion takes off and becomes an all-encompassing trend. And I think we're beyond the 10%. I really do. I don't think we're much beyond it, but I think we're beyond it. We're seeing signs now. I'm seeing signs in my own work that people are flocking to us in ever greater numbers. Let me give you an example. And please, no one take this as boasting or bragging, but I just want to quote from a couple of my website numbers here just to prove this point. Typically in any given month, if you go back to 2014, and I went back and researched this, we would have an average of anywhere between 150 and about 175,000 new people on the website in any given month. And that's at the Common Sense Show. And that means people who had never been there before, not a year ago, not 2 years ago. And in the month of April, we had 631,000 plus new visitors, but that's not where it ends. In May, as we just completed the May cycle, I looked at it this morning, and we had over 550,000 new new viewers to the Common Sense Show. That doesn't have anything to do with Dave Hodges. In fact, Annie and I and Katie have discussed this. This has to do with, one, the people are scared of the government, and they're scared to death with a specific, tangible thing they can look at now called Jade Helm. And two, they're disgusted with their government. They're looking for alternatives, and they know they're not being told the truth on Fox and Friends that refer to Jade Helm as Jed Helm. And when we look at this, this is why my new numbers on my website are growing, and I suspect that you guys are seeing the same thing. In fact, I've talked to a couple of people in the independent media that said they're seeing corresponding jumps. And I think this is tremendous for our movement, because if we have any chance of pushing this back, we have to have the sound of marching feet, and we haven't had that ever. And this is why people like Doug and Joe Hagmann, Steve Quayle and Dave Hodges and John B. Wells, why we can be so easily marginalized. But as these numbers grow, as 10% becomes 30, becomes 60, and then, you're still watching CNN becomes, the giggle factor, that's when we know we've really turned the corner, and that's when these guys are going to become desperate and do desperate things. And I think that they're being proactively desperate right now, and Jade Helm is an expression of that desperation, letting ISIS be encamped off our border across a 47-mile barren area with no border patrol whatsoever, and we let in MS-13 and bring in people from parts of the world that hate the United States. They're desperate. These are the actions of desperate people who know that the country is waking up.
Exactly. And I have to say, I just want to say this. When you mentioned the 47-mile path of entry, I don't know in my absence if you had talked about that or not, but you did an excellent article on the Barber Report, the 47-mile path of entry for ISIS, nuclear weapons. And, back in, I think it was 2004, we had reported on some local police as well as the Border Patrol finding evidence of Al-Qaeda or Muslim terrorists, Islamic terrorists entering through the border. And we were laughed at. I mean, we were just absolutely taken to task about it. Well, people want to see the proof, and of course it wasn't forthcoming because at the time they did not want that information. Don't forget this is under Bush. They didn't want that information out. But so I mean, I just want to commend you on the article, the 47-mile stretch of unguarded entry into the United States. People have got to understand that, look at America as your house. I mean, if you are going to protect your home, you're not going to leave your garage door wide open or your back patio doors wide open and say, hey, we've secured the house, and then worry about what's happening elsewhere in your house or, So this is all a farce, and this is a designed orchestration I believe, David, and let me get your take on this. I mean, are we not seeing a push towards the North American Union here, among other things? But I mean, this lack of borders. I mean, in a larger sense, we're becoming one North American Union here, and that was
what I said to Joe when you were off checking on the technical issues was that I mentioned the refugee resettlement program on the heels of that 47 barren stretch of unguarded desert along the border, and I said among many things this opens up false flag opportunities, and ISIS is trying to procure nuclear weapons. We know that, and it also speaks to the MS-13 fifth column intruders. It speaks to the fact that we have 92% of these refugee resettlement, tens of thousands of people coming into the country from regions of the country that hate us. 92% are Muslim, and they're bringing with us their notions of Sharia law. This is about deculturizing America. And if you deculturize America and you go to a North American Union, what have you lost?
Our sovereignty, we lost the country. We lost everything. I mean, bottom line, right?
Well, we're on the verge now. I'm going to make an analogy to chemtrails. I remember when I first started noticing chemtrails back in the mid to late 90s, and I thought, how bizarre is this? This is not normal. This isn't weird. And I was concerned about air quality, and I said, look at that coming out of the plane. Those aren't regular contrails. Okay, but to people who are alive now, let's say you're 18 years old now, this is what you grew up with. When you look up and see the chemtrails expand into sun-covering clouds, and they cover the entire sky by the end of the day, that's a reality that you're used to. You think that's nature. And right now, we have in our country people between the ages of about 30 where I think you really kind of discover your place as an American and our heritage and so forth and what truly special gifts we've been bestowed. And from 30 on up, 70, 80, you have people who understand America. They understand the First Amendment. They understand constitutional law that keeps out-of-control government in check. But to the young generation, this is becoming their new reality. The lawlessness, the corruption that we see, and if it's allowed to continue and grow, if we don't correct this in the next 15 to 20 years, even if we have this long, if we do this, Doug, and stay asleep at the wheel, the new generation is going to think this is how it's supposed to be, just like the chemtrails.
Boy, what a great analogy. And you're right. I mean, we're 14 years away from 9/11, beyond 9/11. So I'm just trying to do the math here. Anyone under the age of 30, perhaps. In terms of 9/11 or whatever the topic might be, or the Patriot Act and the new normal for security. Yeah, this is their reality. You're right. Okay, I get that.
Yeah, and we don't have that long, though, because I wrote an article earlier in the week, or last week, I should say, that talked about how Jade Helms coming at a time for announced genocide against the American people. And people go, genocide, there you go, exaggerating again, Dave. Well, you tell me what word you'd use to describe this. We have the Deagle report, and we have a list of Deagle's partners. And I know for a fact that Deagle is a CIA front operation, and they say by the year 2025 we'll have 66 million people. Well, if that's all we had was one source, you go, well, that's interesting, keep an eye on it, but it's not proof. But then you've got a website that was designed and controlled by a guy named Mike Krulig. And Mike Krulig was President Obama's first community activist advisor. He was a mentor to the president when he had his first semi-real job. And Mike Krulig has visited the White House several times, and he's best known for his Agenda 21 policies coming out of something called Building One America, which is about the attempted centralization by redistributing tax money to the inner cities of getting people to move to the inner cities in stack and packs. And on Krulig's website called America2050.org, they said by the year 2050 that we will have 11 mega regions, and they have the maps for it. And this isn't dreaming, because they also talk about the bullet trains that are being constructed with the tracks, all these trade zones that we are seeing discussed now that haven't yet come into being. And this guy knows his stuff. He's an Agenda 21 expert, and he says by 2050 we will have 11 mega regions with 6 million each. That's 66 million people. That matches the 2025 projection for Deagle. And people say, well, look, you got different dates. Well, okay, let's say that you cause catastrophic events to happen to the American people, and you reduce the population by 90%. In other words, you've got survivors, 66 million, and where are the other 250 million? They're dead. But when you rebuild out of the rubble and you reorganize your society along Agenda 21 policies, I would say that Krulig's probably right. You're going to take about 25 years to get this into play. And what you're ending up with is a movie that was very telling. And it was part one of the Hunger Games, where you see the bullet train that was taking the gladiator contestants to Capital City. They were going through this vast expanse of wilderness with no human in sight, and there were 12 districts. But one of the districts was supposedly, in part one, was no longer in existence, had been destroyed because of the previous rebellion. So you had 11 districts, which happens to match the 11 super regions of Krulig's 2050. In fact, let me digress one level down. And I've said this many times on my show, and I don't think I've ever said it here, Doug, and I really believe this. And if they want to sue me, then I'll put them on the stand and question about Agenda 21. Suzanne Collins, I tried to interview. She blew me off, but I didn't feel bad because she blew everybody off pretty much except for Good Morning America, and her interview with them was awful. Now, here's a lady who's written a trilogy. My son read this in the 5th grade, and best-selling books. Authors can't get enough interviews when they're selling their books. I know when Jerome Corsi is writing a book, he's told me he'll do 5, 6, 7, 8 interviews a day.
Right.
Well, she wasn't doing any, and yet she writes this amazing Agenda 21 book. I mean, the first 25 minutes of that movie was a primer on what Agenda 21 would look like in the future if these people get their way. So, you know what she wrote prior to Agenda 21? Nothing but child fantasy books. Never anything with Agenda 21 stuff in it. Now, if that's all we had, again, you just have one big coincidence. But there's another book that my son read. So you get educated by my son when he was in 5th grade. But my son read this in the 5th grade, too. It was called Among the Hidden. And it was a book about one-child family restrictions, caloric restrictions on how much you could eat, you know, just Agenda 21 stuff. Well, I thought, okay, I can't get Suzanne Collins to come on my show, but this woman isn't that well known, so I'll get her on my show. She'd never answer me. And I went and did some research about what her previous work was. Her previous work was child fantasy novels. It's my position, it's my firm belief, although I can't firmly prove it, that both of these authors were handed these scripts and not written word for word, but here's your plot, author. Write a script that matches the plot. And by the way, when I heard Suzanne Collins interviewed on GMA, and she tried to explain what her story was about, it was terrible. It was disjointed. It was disorganized. And I'm thinking, she doesn't even sound like she even wrote this stuff. And this was before I had my notions that she probably didn't write the plot.
Interesting.
Predictive programming.
Think about that. But okay. Oh, wow.
It's amazing what you can learn from a 10-year-old.
Well, you know, the thing is, you mentioned the book Among the Hidden. I was told about this book by a teacher, okay, who this was a teacher of a middle school, and apparently, no, this is a while back, but apparently this was on an assignment list that was approved by the school board here in my community. And the conversation in Among the Hidden it came out sometime in the 90s. I don't recall exactly when, but it was about population control. I mean, it was pure and simple about population control. And okay, so you combine that with the Hunger Games and the left-handed turn there the author took with respect to the subject matter. I'm just working this out in my head right now. I can see where you're headed, and I could see where this would play out. My goodness. Okay. Wow, the agenda is nefarious indeed.
Well, it's called predictive programming, and you know what's interesting though? For the most part, when you have these movies, what was it called? The Avengers, the recent movie just came out. I took my son to see it. And they had the guy that stars on the Blacklist, and his name escapes me. He plays Raymond Reddington, I think his name is. It's actually a pretty decent show. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I'll catch that occasionally. But he was the voice for the protagonist in the Avengers, and there was one New World Order line after another. You have to have chaos before you can have order. You have to destroy the many so you can save the few. I mean, these were the kind of lines that were coming out of his mouth, and I was almost giggling at this because it was so obvious, what was going on here. But what's interesting in these movies is that these movies almost always end with some kind of happy ending. So it's kind of like the globalists want to tell us what's going to happen, but then they want to take away the edge by making us think it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much like, and I don't want to be crass here, but I mean it's much like the Nazis handing out bars of soap and towels to the Jews that were leading to the showers. I mean it's a tactic to convince them. It was a tactic to convince them that they were real showers, and and I say that we're being treated psychologically in the same fashion. It's our psychological soap and towel here as we're being led to these ultimately these genocidal chambers, if you will. So on a larger scale, man,
there is something I'd like to bring up if you wouldn't
Please.
mind.
Yeah,
and that would
the
be
floor is yours.
I wanted to bring up the media attacks that I've been going through, and it's okay. I got really tough skin. I coached college basketball for a long time. If you survive in that profession, you got to have skin pretty darn thick. So the criticism just bounces off of me and the attacks, but they're noteworthy because they're so consistent. Let me just start with people who are friendly. I was on, and I just love this talk show host. She is so good. She is on a Fox radio station in Utah. Her name is Kate Dalley. And Kate called me the morning of March 27th, which we didn't know at the time, but that was the date of the Fort Lauderdale extraction of political dissidents drill under Jade Helm that was videotaped. And she had me on that same day, but we did not know about that drill because it hadn't yet happened until that night. So we were on. I was scheduled to do 10 minutes on Jade Helm, kind of a little soundbite, and that's a lot of times you get ambushed on mainstream media when they do these soundbite interviews.
Oh, yeah.
But I went on for 10, and they kept me for the entire hour. And it was a thoroughly enjoyable interview. Now, she said, we're going to have you back. And I suspect, she hasn't told me this, but I suspect she got resistance. But I did hear back from her 6 weeks later. And now I got some real Jade Helm material. I mean, I was just getting started with this when I interviewed with her back in late March. Now, 6 weeks later, I had a lot. And she said, you're back by popular demand. If I read between the lines, upper management may not have been happy with having me on, but the people there wanted me on. So I go on. But in the course of what was to be a 45-minute interview, I was knocked off the air twice. And in fact, you got caught up in this scenario too, Doug, because you had sent me a request by email if I wanted to come on your show that night. Well, they sent me an email, Dave, how do we get you back? And they tried to call my cell phone and didn't get through. All my communications were taken down until after midnight, including your email with your invitation to come on your show. And someone didn't want that interview to come off. So that was one interesting occurrence on Kate's show. And Kate had nothing to do with it. Kate's a great host, and she's in pursuit of the truth, and she was genuinely angry that Utah was named as a hostile state in the Jade Helm drills. Now, go forward to NPR. NPR did not mention me by name in their article on their website, but what they did do was they took quotes from my website, hypertext linked back to them, but then totally took comments out of context and tried to make it seem like I was saying extreme things that couldn't possibly be true. Like at that time, planned genocide. Well, I wasn't saying that at that time. Right now, with what I've learned about the Walmarts, I think all options are on the table. But at that time, I wasn't saying that. And simultaneously to that, a Houston TV station came after me. And they showed an article I had written and said that I made the claim that there were Americans being held in Texas death domes and they were being slaughtered. Well, I never said anything close to that. I mean, it was ludicrous. And I'm thinking, why a Houston TV station? Well, as I thought for a second, I thought, well, you know what? It was only 3 days ago. You were on KTRH, 740 a.m. out of Houston, and you did a pretty extensive Jade Helm interview. And you brought up, and this was on March 27th as well, and I brought up extractions as a possibility, and I said, it might sound ludicrous. And the host said, oh, no. He says, we had a deputy sheriff on here an hour before you who's part of the local contingent in Jade Helm, and he admitted it was extractions. He goes, so we don't think this is ludicrous at all. Well, the same people called to have me back on their morning show with their morning host. So they get me up at 5 a.m., and I'm getting ready to go on their show, and this guy comes on and says, we changed our mind. We're not going to have you on today. Someone pulled the plug. And then
you
3 days
were saying
the
this
Houston
yesterday.
station said that I claimed that Americans were being slaughtered in Texas death domes. So, I've really gone through with the media. Now, I want to thank NPR because NPR, notoriety they brought to me, put 30,000 people on my website in 2 days. And not only that, a lot of them have stayed. I'm getting emails from them that say, glad I found your website, glad we found your show. So I actually sent the guy a thank you note. I asked him if he could write another hit piece on me because it was good for the ratings.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't get an answer, obviously. I threatened the reporter at that TV station. I said, this is lawsuit stuff here. I said, what you said was an absolute fabrication. It wasn't even interpretation. It was an outright lie. And I said, I could bring you across state lines. And I said, it's $10,000 per occurrence because you violated my intellectual property rights by twisting what I said. And I didn't hear back from them. I'm sure they gave it to their legal, and I'm not going to pursue it. I was just hoping to slow them down. So I've had a lot of difficulty with the media, and I'm finding places where I'm quoted saying something where I haven't said anything even close to that. So the media has been on an all-out attack on this. But what's interesting is extraction drills are now admitted to by Jade Helm personnel. So here the media is saying, that's ludicrous, stupid, could never be that, and yet Jade Helm personnel have come out with this. In fact,
just to be clear, Dave, just to be clear now for our listeners, when you say extraction drills, some people might have a different idea of what that means. Be very clear. What is that? What do you mean when you say extraction drills?
Well, I know this guy named Doug Hagmann, and he just shoots his mouth off too much, and he's talking about things the government does wrong, and he's got a big listening audience, a big following. We need to go remove Doug from the scene because he's giving people bad ideas. So they drop into your house around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. They break down your door with a battering ram. They come in with bulletproof vests and guns drawn, and they do what they will. And if you're lucky and survive, they put you on a van, whisk you away, and that's extraction.
And that's what we saw. Just to be clear, folks, that's what we saw, ostensibly at least in Fort Lauderdale on March 27th, as you alluded to before. I just wanted to be clear on that because I got a couple of emails over the weekend mentioning extraction, and they were thinking of something totally different than what you just described. So, very good.
And look what's going on. I saw today an article, Justice Department studying far-right social media use to combat violent extremism. We've seen the writing on the wall for a long time. Those DHS reports that they put out labeling Christians and people who are anti-abortion, who are anti-government as extremists. And a lot of these social media sites and some forums on the internet have been linked to data mining. And Dave, can you speak to the NSA and their data mining and what people who have already believe what they believe and have put it out there on the internet, or even said so in the privacy of their own home? Is there really a difference there when it comes to these extraction teams, do you think?
Well, there's different levels that you're evaluated on in terms of the threat that you pose to the existing order. And the NSA maintains a threat matrix, and I've been told by, how do I say this tactfully, someone who, if he revealed his name, probably wouldn't be around to see tomorrow. But I've been told that they use a 16-scale model to evaluate every American. They have all our voice prints, obviously. They monitor every communication that we have, and it goes into their computers, their supercomputers, and they cipher and divide the data into aggregate groups, 16 different scales you get a score on, and then you get a cumulative aggregate score that represents what they call your threat matrix score. And no one really knows that I know, what our threat matrix score is, kind of like your credit score. What's your threat matrix score? Well, no one knows. And no one knows, even if you knew your threat matrix score, at what level would you be at before you'd be red-listed, blue-listed, or whatever. But what we do know is that they have compiled an enemies list. And the MIAC report, I was told by my source on this, was actually the direct result of NSA data mining, because they said these people are the people that are most likely to stand up to tyranny and what's coming and so forth. And so they came out with a MIAC report to further vilify people. And actually they thought the MIAC report, they wanted it to go public because they wanted to scare people off from these kinds of behaviors and not want to associate with people like you and me for fear of becoming a victim. But they surveil you in so many ways. You may never have been on the internet and said anything. People maybe never listened to my show or your show, but if they've ever said negative things about the government and they're around a cell phone, it's been recorded. It's on a supercomputer and it adds to your threat matrix score. If Doug, Joe, and Dave Hodges get together for breakfast, the fact that our three cell phones are in proximity to each other greatly escalates our threat matrix score on one of the scales. This is what I've been told. They're looking for people who are expressing views that are non-compliant to the coming existing order, and they're also looking for people who have the ability to rally people in terms of resistance. In fact, I've been told the red list today, as it's euphemistically called, they don't really call it that for what I've been told, but the red list is made up more of people who can influence others, their ability to lead and inspire many to follow a cause, as opposed to the most extreme person that's out there on the internet. So that's the threat, and we're all at different levels in the eyes of the NSA and ultimately this administration. I think it's safe to say that three of us have a greatly elevated threat matrix score. If this were a blood sugar report, we'd probably come in at 1,000.
Well, they better hope that they don't put the three of us and Jones and Steve Quayle on the same bus, because they're going to have their hands full. I'll tell you that right now.
Have a hell of a time on the way to detention.
Yeah, and let me say this. They're going to have to get us out first, okay? They're going to have to extract us first. Now, and I say that with bravado, and I suspect people might be listening and saying, "Oh, shut up, Doug," because what we're fighting, and I have to say this, we're fighting a very formidable force and very superior armaments to what we could ever possibly have. And this, in my view, is where not only our intuition, but the divine and spiritual hand of protection comes into play. And I think we have to acknowledge that at some point, because we can, and the other thing, Dave, too, is none of us in the alternative media can do this by ourselves. I mean, that's why it's so important that we all stick together and we all, really work together towards exposing this tyranny as well. So, man, all of this stuff, it's pretty heavy, isn't it? I mean, don't you just sometimes just want to unplug and just kind of crawl into a fetal position or whimper a lot like I do? I mean,
it's easy to feel overwhelmed. There's no question about that. These views have always been there on the part of, well, let's go back to the 1800s in England when the Fabian socialists had their birth. If you're not good to society, you should be exterminated, and the elite should make all the decisions, and the rest of you that we let live should be happy to just be alive and do what you're told and shut up. It's Fabian socialism. And as those views came forward, we saw them expressed, in other forms, Marxism, communism, fascism, whatever ism you want to put on it. But these views have always been there. The reason why we're seeing it, I think, in such an upfront, in-your-face, and overwhelming manner today is because the other side is desperate and they're rolling out everything that they have.
Yeah.
And this is why. And the one thing I tell people, and I think obviously your show, my show, we're all going to have a lot of new people. And as a result of having a lot of new people, we need to understand that there are people coming to us at various levels of understanding and politely saying ignorance. And what these people need to be made to understand very quickly is this isn't winning a singular issue. Maybe we could get GMOs labeled and banned, but that wouldn't solve the problem. What we're facing is a pervasive, all-encompassing, philosophical belief system that's largely based on the tenets of Lucifer. And I'm not saying this for dramatic effect, but what we're seeing is very Luciferian, very satanic, and these life philosophies contained by the globalists speak to this. I mean, who was it? David Spangler, who's the head of Planetary Initiative for the UN and Eco Charter 92. He said no one will come to the New World Order without pledging an allegiance to Lucifer.
I won't enter the New World without a Luciferian initiation.
I told that to my neighbor, okay, who is very plugged in. No, I talk about my neighbor. I've got more than one neighbor, okay, folks, so just understand that. Anyway, I told that to my neighbor, and he didn't believe me. So I had to, actually walk him through that statement. People don't believe that people like that, like Spangler said that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, but there's a whole host of them. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, has said we'd be better off without people of those kind. And I don't even think it matters who those kind are, whether they're African Americans or Latino or Baptists or whatever they would be, poor people, homeless, does it really matter? The fact that you'd have a Supreme Court Justice whose job is to uphold the Constitution said we'd be better off without those kind of people, that shows you how far the people who are in our government have fallen. In fact, it's funny. My wife is much more reserved than I am. I'm outspoken, in case you haven't noticed. But my wife isn't nearly as outspoken as I am. But yesterday, my son said something negative about the government, and I keep him away from a lot of this stuff for obvious reasons. I want to let him come to his own understandings. But he sees things and he says things. And yesterday, my wife had a very telling comment. She said, there's not anything really wrong fundamentally with our government. She said, what's wrong are the people that we allow to run our government.
Very profound, and I agree with that. We were established as a constitutional republic, and many of the founders' statements reflect that there must be a moral component to the government, and a godly one as well, despite what the globalists say, or the progressives, Marxist progressives say that, oh, they never said that. No, they did. So yeah, the some call it an experiment, some call it, or whatever you want to call it, the constitutional republic. There's nothing wrong with this. It's the people, as you say, and you're right on the money the way you pointed that out. It's the people that are in power.
And we're up against the top of the hour break, Dave. Do you mind? You want to take some phone calls in the third hour?
Oh, of course, sure.
A lot of people want to talk to you.
Yeah, we do have people on hold, ready to jump on board. So for those of you on hold, it does look like our phone lines are full. If you're on hold and you want to ask a question, press 1. If not, we'll just keep trying to call in as callers filter through. Otherwise, we're going to take our top of the hour break right now. You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this first day of June 2015 with Dave's show. His website is thecommonsenseshow.com. Thecommonsenseshow.com. Bookmark that site. And I'll say it again. Last night, my dad was on the show with Dave, and Dave's on the show tonight. So it's a two-parter almost. Just go back and listen to the first interview. We'll be right back after these short messages. Stay with us. Report on this first day of June 2015. Our guest today is Dave Hodges. His website is thecommonsenseshow.com. That's thecommonsenseshow.com. In this hour, we're going to be taking calls from our listeners. Anybody who has questions for Dave or anything we talked about on this show, give us a call at 661-244-9839. And the phones might be full right now, but just keep trying if you want to get on, and we'll do our best to get you on. We'll take our first call from area code 805. Thanks for calling in. You're live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report.
Hello, hi. This is Tom from Ventura, California. I was going to ask Doug, about 10 days ago I mentioned Scott Bennett, and you watched the interview, and you said you had some people on it. And I know Dave also interviewed. Anything new on that about the 19,000 accounts he had that were all terrorist accounts?
Well, Dave, Scott Bennett, you interviewed Scott Bennett.
Yes.
In fact, that was the interview that didn't air, so to speak, contemporaneous to the interview, I think, right?
Well, the archives were a big hit, but yes, I did interview Scott.
You want to address your conversation with Scott? And I would urge everyone to listen to the archives from the Common Sense Show and Dave's interview with Scott Bennett. But you want to address what Scott had revealed at all, or
well, what he revealed was he was being asked to do things in his role of PSYOPs for Army Special Operations Forces that went against his mandate to uphold the Constitution. And they worked with him for a while, but when they couldn't get him the way they wanted, they put him in prison for 2 years for forging, get this, a false housing report. A false housing report got you 2 years in the federal pen. And while he was in the pen, he met some people that were related to stuff that he already suspected, which was ISIS being run and funded by the CIA. He met one of the paymasters that had been put in prison who ran one of the Swiss bank accounts to fund ISIS, and his knowledge of this took off since. And when he got out of prison, he began to research this more fully, and he is preparing at this time to launch a suit in federal district court against the U.S. government for these crimes against the people of the United States.
All right.
One more thing, Dave and Doug. The kid that got sentenced to the death penalty in the Boston bombing, I don't know how much research you have done. I've done quite a bit, and I see him completely innocent. And he was just a patsy. Have you done any research on that? Because supposedly June the 24th is his death sentence.
Well,
they're executing him that quickly?
No. That's when he's going to be officially, I believe, sentenced to death. Right? Is that what you're saying, caller?
Right. That's what I thought.
Well, I thought that had already been done, where he was sentenced to death. But there's a lot more that meets the eye. I wrote an article on this. I didn't do a lot with the Boston bombing. aside from the martial law stuff that ensued, because I said you're seeing your future, America. And as far as the brothers go, I think there's some real unanswered questions as to their guilt. It was clearly a staged false flag event. I interviewed a teacher, and then subsequently he made a video, and he was a participant, and he said that some things led me to believe that there were personnel stationed there that knew exactly what was going to happen and where those bombs were going to go off. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more here than meets the eye. And when you say patsy, well, when you do a false flag event, you have to have a patsy in most cases, and I think we might be looking at it. But I'm really not the guy to have the final word on this because I'm not an expert on this case.
And just
well, they had Dr. Lorraine Day. If you're familiar with her.
Oh, I've
she's the number
her.
one. Excuse me?
Yes, I know Lorraine.
Yeah, well, she came out and said she knew within 5 minutes it was faked because she says you get your legs blown off, you're going to bleeding so much, and you try to sit up, you'll die because there won't be enough blood to get to the brain. And here they got him in a wheelchair, wheeling him down the middle of the street. And she says, that's impossible. She says, I have removed many limbs. And she's supposed to be the number one trauma doctor in America. And I thought that was pretty interesting, her comment.
Yeah, well, she's retired now, but she was the doctor back in the, how far back does it go? Maybe early to mid-'90s, who said that her clinical opinion, and she certainly was qualified to offer this opinion, that the CIA had created AIDS, HIV, and that first really became aware of her. Art Bell used to interview her. So when I finally got my own radio show, I couldn't wait to get her on. She was the most explosive interviews I've ever had.
And thank you, caller. And just I saw here real quick that the formal sentence will be handed down on the 24th of June. So he just hasn't formally been sentenced yet, and that's what's going to be happening the 24th of this month.
Yeah, I thought it threw me there for a second. And Dave, don't you find it difficult to keep track of all these various incidents, dates, and everything? I mean, I've got 5 notebooks going here right now on my desk. Okay, each covering a different area. Man.
I think I got about 1,000 articles on my website. It's becoming like a library database. It's hard to keep track. I mean, I'll cover a story in some detail, and a year later, because I've covered so much in between, you start to forget some of the details or some of the last names or how to spell them.
Oh, I get that. Before we go back to the phones, I've got a caller or an emailer who desperately wants me to ask you this question. Out of all the stories that you've covered in the past and are currently covering right now, what do you think? And you can say anything to this. What do you think is the most important to the American public? To the American public right now, what's the most important?
I think that what this administration has planned for us, I think Jade Helm is at least related to that concern. They want to see 90% of us dead. I'm convinced of that. And I think Jade Helm could lead into something like that.
Yeah. And I'm convinced too. After doing your program last night, which I just want to again thank you for the time that you put into your programs. I know that you put in a lot of research in your articles. I learned a lot last night as I appeared. Folks, the Common Sense Show airs every Sunday. New time now, 8 to 11. Okay, so definitely tune in to the Common Sense Show. Dave Hodges is our guest, 8 to 11 every Sunday. Fantastic research, and of course, just a great program as well. Go ahead, Joe.
All right, let's go back to the phones. We're going to go to area code 843. 843, you're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges.
Hey, good evening, gentlemen. This is Troy from South Carolina. I've been following your stuff pretty closely, and Dave Hodges, I'm going to look on your stuff and try to get my dad to realize what's going on. But I just want to make a quick note, and I'll listen on the air. The past year, I live real close to the Charleston Air Force Base down here, and I think it's, the C-131 cargo jets? They've been, in various days, they've been flying around the clock, back to back, coming out of the northwest. And I was just wondering, after hearing about Jade Helm for the first time, they weren't carrying supplies and equipment for the staging areas out there in the western states. So I'm going to hang up into your comment off the air.
It's a good question. Good point. I don't know about your area, but I do know about Colorado. Fort Carson's doing the biggest military drill since World War II. Some people say it's bigger. This is going on all over the country. What he just described is what I hear 4 or 5 times a day by email. People send me pictures. Some people try to make recordings of all these jets and helicopters flying over their house, unprecedented, and it's happening in all 50 states.
That I can verify that. We're getting reports of increased military traffic, aircraft, especially in the Fort Drum area, upstate New York. I've gotten reports all over the place. So, good observation, good point. And, what are we looking at here? Dave, did you happen to see the story, and I'll ask this, of a Russian fighter jet chasing away a couple of American fighters here over our territory? And
yes, I did.
Yeah, what do you make of these provocations, which appear to be getting more and more frequent?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Except, are we witnessing the new rules of engagement, which will neuter the effectiveness of our forces if we have to fight against foreign forces, whether they be in the domestic aspect or overseas? That's what I first thought of. I said, are these the new rules of engagement?
That's a troubling thought. I mean, when you say that, obviously we're taking a backseat to foreign powers, and wow, okay. Let's go to.
I got an email a couple days ago, and it was from, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'll have to paraphrase from memory. But a gentleman named Russ sent me an email whose wife works at Portland International Airport, and she said that 150 Russians came through 3 weeks ago. She described their apparel. They were speaking Russian. They were loaded into unmarked white vans and took off. They're here. They're not just flying over our airspace. They're occupying territory. And there's not a topic, and I mentioned this to you last night on my show, there's not a topic that I've taken more grief over than saying that Russians are on our soil. And it's amazing to me because I have produced this FEMA agreement. It's a bilateral agreement authorized by the president, and it's in conjunction with the Russian Foreign Ministry. And in 2011, they agreed to let the first 15,000 Russian soldiers into the country for, quote, disaster preparedness. My first thought was, what's the National Guard going on permanent vacation? Why do we need the Russians to come in and do that? But it's martial law training. Yeah. And this is what we're seeing all across the country. We see enclaves of Russian soldiers living in places like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and thanks to people like Dr. Susan Hellman, who has been in contact with me. She's been on my show. These people are very unpopular. They don't interact with the locals. They're not married. They have no kids. They work at jobs that don't require public interaction. And they disappear for long stretches of times in white vans that go to the Smoky Mountains, and they disappear in the mountains for God knows what kind of military maneuvers. And that's in Gatlinburg. I had a lady contact me from Ketchikan, Alaska, and I had Russian soldiers in uniform walking down the street. This is all over this country. Obama gave away 7 islands to Russia back in 2010, oil-rich, and 2 of them you would want to use if you were going to launch an amphibious invasion of Alaska. We had the F-22 flight suspended by Obama for oxygen uptake problems. They patrolled the coast of Alaska against Russian incursion. Okay, I understand that, Mr. President. Why didn't you replace them with the F-16s? That wasn't done. We've all but done away with the American submarine patrols up and down the Alaskan coast. We're inviting the Russians to attack us. It's like that 47-mile stretch in the southern border with ISIS. We're inviting these people who mean us harm to come into this country, and this is courtesy of our president.
It's not just related or isolated to Obama and his band of merry, insane minions, though. I mean, it wasn't the stage, or the stage has been being set for this.
Well, I agree, but it's the face of this.
Right.
He's an identifiable target I can mention, and people say, okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, he answers to a higher power, and I don't mean the Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, exactly, and it seems to me that, if I were George W. Bush, which I'm, obviously I'm glad I'm not, but if I was,
I'm glad you're not. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, but if I was, I'm thinking as a former, president of the United States, I would be yelling from the rooftop, hey, this guy that took over for me, that was selected, is engaged in seditious activity, okay? If you are truly concerned about the state and welfare of your country. Now, I understand the courtesy extended by former presidents to the people that take over for them. However, it seems to me that what we're into is not normal government, but a huge conspiracy that is lasted, or that's gone on for a number of administrations. I mean,
yeah, each one has their role to play. When you live in glass houses like Bush has, you can't throw stones. Exactly. Because Bush, the 9/11 fiasco, that speaks for itself. You've got rampant child sex trafficking with major corporations and banks like HSBC, and people pay a fine but never go to prison. And he basically started the nuclear downturn of our forces in this country in comparison to the Russians. We made more sacrifices than him. He oversaw the introduction of the Patriot Act, which basically eviscerated the Fourth Amendment. And then, of course, when the excrement hits the fan, he and Daddy have locked up a huge getaway in Paraguay. So I don't know that Bush has the moral authority to cast stones at anybody.
Oh, very true. Yeah, I totally agree.
And that he's probably one of the most intellectually deprived presidents we've ever had. I completely understand. When you said that, I just suddenly had visions of the old Saturday Night Live skits come through my head. Anyway, go ahead, Joe.
All right, we're going to take a call from area code 205-205. We're live.
A lot of people just want to talk to you. You're a popular guy.
You're live with the
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, my name's Robert. I was just going to talk about, it's like you were just talking about, George Bush. I think the Bushes were some of the biggest criminals that's ever been in the White House. But again, Obama and George Bush, they both fall under the same. I think they both fall under the same person. They may let them have their own little pet projects. They go to the same people as calling the shots. I don't think a party really matters.
Why do the same faces keep showing up in these administrations, like Kissinger and Brzezinski? Those, if you want to know what's happening, those are the people really running the show.
Yeah, I agree that, and I just that for me, I've got friends and they say, if we get another Republican in the White House, it's gone way past that. It's way past the party. That's long been gone.
They're two wings of the same party. There's no difference between them. They're both co-opted. The answer doesn't lie in politics, except for one thing, and I would say this. America could make a symbolic move, although I don't know how far-reaching the ramifications would be. But if I could wave a magic wand politically in this country, what I would ask people to do is to vote out every single incumbent. And I don't care if you think they're good or not, because if you start making exceptions, you're not going to accomplish your task. Vote out every one of them. The Diebold voting machines aren't geared towards overturning an election that's 100% against and 0% for. And that would be hard for them to cover. And that would do a lot to wake up people. If you had 70% of the country vote out all the incumbents, that'd be a hard election to fix. And a lot of people who aren't awake yet would start taking notice and saying, oh, what are they all upset about? So no incumbents. The other thing I would do, too, is I would outlaw lobbying. And I mentioned this to Doug last night when he was on the show. I would treat lobbying like what it is. It's prostitution. And I would put these Johns away in prison and let them rot there for a while. The lobbyists have wrecked this country on behalf of the corporations that are influence peddling.
I agree with that totally, 100%. It's just prostitution's all it is. Doug was talking a little bit about that, and that kind of got me off. One of the things I was wanting to talk to you about, Dave, you were talking about these Walmart. I don't know, they were talking about the plumbing issues. I call it a thing, and I listened to a guy talk about responsible journalism, and I agree with that. We got to be careful. But I did see a guy where he was showing it was already a Walmart that had been closed, and it had the high dot, it was showing the Constantine wire on the top of it. He said this wire was even the most expensive type of Constantine wire that you would use for high-level security, and that they were turning to this wall. He was using railroad tracks coming up the side of it and all these kind of things, and it just made me think about all these things that are going on. Did y'all see anything about that?
Yeah, I saw the same video you're referring to. That was what I mentioned to you earlier, Doug and Joe, about the barbed wire that was high-level quality that faced inward in a closed Walmart. Caller, was that in Ohio or Indiana? It was one of those two states.
I thought somebody said it was Ohio, but I'm not sure.
I think that's absolutely right.
I missed you saying that earlier. I missed about the first 45 minutes of the show. I don't know if that's when you talked about it, then. I'm sorry. And I've heard let me ask you another question real quick, because I've heard it's been debunked, and then I've heard it before. What is your theory on the government buying guillotines? I've heard it's been debunked. What is your theory on that?
I'm not sure. There's unconfirmed reports, but I will tell you one thing we can confirm, but it might not be related. Back in the 90s, a state legislator from Georgia had the brilliant idea that they should get rid of the electric chair and introduce the guillotine. Let me digress for a second. I'll walk you through this, why this has caught my attention, but I don't have a final answer on this. What do people like ISIS and the extremists in the Middle East do? They like to behead people. Well, how would the globalists benefit from beheading people? Because the organs are intact. Transhumanism. And let me go a step further. FM 3-39.4, which is basically the field manual that says how FEMA camps will be conducted to a large extent. And in there, and I don't recall the section number now, I wasn't counting on talking about this tonight, but in one of the sections there, they talk about how U.S. military will train foreign troops, who in turn will train more foreign troops to take over these camps. And in my paranoid conspiratorial mind, I started thinking, gee, is that where they're going to bring in the guillotines? And you'll have people from ISIS or similar groups beheading selected targets, and there'll be a whole cottage industry of human spare parts along the lines of transhumanism. Now, I know this sounds terribly preposterous, but, Doug, I got to feel that part of you is kind of curious as to what I just said, too.
Well, indeed. Yeah. Preposterous, no. I don't think so. At this point, anything. It seems like anything goes, and I think that if you look at the real Satanist portion of what's going on here, and you look, I mean, Dave, 30 years ago, you mentioned beheading, for example. People would be horrified, much like, for example, when In Cold Blood, the movie. I don't know how many people remember that when that first came out. Oh, people were just absolutely horrified. But now, that's tame. I think we've gone through an evolutionary process where we've been prepared, we've been conditioned to accept things like beheading, and if they can do it for a purpose, and transhumanism, everlasting immortality, or whatever you want to call it, I can see where this it's not preposterous at all.
Well, when you get so immersed in what these perverts write about and what they really want to do and the kind of future world they want to live in, where they escape their bodies and live in receptacles to achieve immortality. I mean, this isn't me saying this, folks. This is what they write. You have to. Really, nothing is off the table when you hear Ray Kurzweil talk about some of the things he's talked about. I think everything's on the table at this point. In fact, let me just put a canopy over this whole thing. Annie and I have a dear friend that we don't talk too much anymore, and he used to be in the NSA, and his name's Vance Davis. And we also used to interview A.C. Griffith, who was in the NSA, and they both said something very similar, especially Vance provided real detail. He said that there's been a war going on for eons between good and evil. They teach this in the NSA, he said to some of their agents. And he said that one of the missions that some people have is to capture the soul, because these people are satanic and they look at this as the prize of Jesus and God and his gift, their gifts to the Trinity's gift to humanity, and that they want to capture the soul as a way to have ultimate rebellion against God from the fallen angels. And this is what I believe underlies transhumanism. I used to go to Vance's apartment over in Mesa, Arizona every Saturday, and I used to get hours-long lectures from Vance, fascinating stuff about the philosophical underpinnings of what some of these agents were being taught. And it all came back to the same thing. And then it was, maybe a decade later when I found out that there's this thing out there called transhumanism. And I thought, that's just the backdoor way to try to get the soul that the Satanists haven't been able to get. So when I start coming up with notions like FEMA camps with guillotines, with ISIS as the beheaders, as silly as that may sound, it has some basis in things I've been told before by people in positions of authority.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And thank you, caller. We're going to jump right on to the next caller. Area code 713, we're coming to you. 713, you're live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges. (713)
Going once, 713. All righty.
All right, we'll move right along here. We'll go to area code 313. 313, you're up next. You're live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges. 313.
Wow.
That's our tape delay, I bet.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
All right. I want to come back to the 303. We'll go to area code 256. 256, you're live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing tonight?
Very well.
Well, good. My name's Ann. I came across an article right before the show started. I'm in Alabama. The county next to me, this was in the local newspaper this afternoon, and they're real proud of it. Blunt 911 tower cam and mass text messaging find missing teen in 4 minutes. And the article goes on to talk about something called Nixle. So what they did, it says, let me see, within 4 minutes of issuing the Nixle notification, dispatchers at Blount County 911 had spotted the teen on their tower camera and had also received 2 calls from residents saying they had gotten the notification. So this little town, Aniana, has a population of 6,674 people. And they have a system set up that could find somebody in 4 minutes. So if a town that small, and they're proud of it, I mean, they put it in the local newspaper, yay, we found this kid. If a town that small has a system that can find somebody in 4 minutes, what do the bigger cities have?
Well, it's also another question. They might not just be looking for missing teenage kids in the future. I wrote an article not too long ago, and I said, if you're on the red list, where would you run to? And I made that you couldn't have anything electronic in your proximity. Even if you wouldn't want to have your cell phone, but even if someone you're staying with has a cell phone, everything's being recorded by NSA computers when it's on, and they all have their everyone's voice print is a matter of record now. So if they're looking for you, they just put the voice print tag out there, and here it is. We got him over here at this location.
Right, in 4 minutes flat in a little tiny town like that.
Yeah, that's not surprising. This is the age we live in. George Orwell is far ahead of the time as he was when he wrote his book 1984. He couldn't have envisioned this kind of technology.
Very true.
Well, it put the hair up on the back of my neck when I read it. But like I said, everybody else is on Facebook saying, yay, look at this. They've got the system to find this kid. And I just have to shake my head and not scream.
Well, technology is neutral. It's how you use the technology that makes it a problem or a benefit. And so in that case, finding the kid, that was a good thing. But since I don't trust the people in power right now and they control this technology, I'm really skeptical.
Right. Y'all were talking about the air traffic. In Alabama, our National Guard Center has been being really, really active around Gadsden, and it's constant air traffic at night now. I'm hearing helicopters, and you can hear the military helicopters, the big ones. 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, just flying all over the place.
Is that a change from what it was before?
Excuse me?
Is that a change over what you'd experienced before?
Very much so. Yeah, and about the last, I'd say 3 months, it's picked up enormously.
Yeah, let me ask you,
they went into the airport, and we've got a little local airport that they put a runway in that can now handle the big jets. They went and did a whole makeover that's connected to our National Guard facility. So, yeah, they're ramping up high gear.
Yeah. Doug and Joe, I would imagine that you guys are getting very similar reports to what we're hearing here, and you're probably getting them every day.
Yes. Yeah, and Dave, I don't know whether you've, and caller, you can hang with us for a moment here. I don't know, Dave, are you hearing anything? Is this geographically specific? In other words, are you getting reports more from border areas, or, is it geographically specific what you're getting, or is it just countrywide?
Well, I'm getting it countrywide, but I would say there's probably a greater frequency of this in the southern states. Not just the border states, but even in the Gulf states I'm getting it. But it's all over the country.
Okay. All right. Wow. Caller, anything else?
No, that'd be it. But y'all have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good night. All right.
Folks, this is, wonderful to be able to, and I want to thank, right now I want to thank Dave Hodges personally and professionally, number one, for his reporting, his intrepid reporting, and number two, for taking time out of his busy schedule. He's got a million things he could be doing right now, I'm sure, and his wife probably has 1,000,001 things for him to do as well. And, folks, he's made sacrifices and he's not getting paid for this, obviously. And he doesn't get paid for what he does. It's a labor of love. And, of course, you can support him in a number of different ways, and I would urge that. But recognize the fact that Dave is taking time out of his busy schedule and also taking away time from his family to be with us. And I just want to say, Dave, thank you so much for your generosity of your time and your intrepid reporting, because I know you've taken so many hits, and you do take hits, and we all take hits, but some are worse than others, and yeah, you've been really they've really been, the media's really put you through the mill recently. So
well, the hits, like I said earlier, and by the way, I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind of you, but the hits don't bother me so much. It's just let's just put it this way. There's annoyances that can occur in one's life that are ongoing and pervasive. The occasional article that totally misrepresents your viewpoint, I almost find them comical now. But there's some people that personalize this, and they can make your life difficult. And that's when it comes in and affects my family, is when I do strike back. So,
exactly.
And you probably have some idea of some of the stuff I'm referencing. And so, there is that aspect of it. I became a proud parent, and just like my parents were with me, they did everything they could do to try to help me be successful. They went way above and beyond. And I find my wife and I are trying to do the same as parents. And right now, the way things are going, even if, a lot of our children or some of our children survive what's coming, to what future? And this is what drives me and motivates me to do what I'm doing. I don't do this, for notoriety. I do this more out of fear. Sometimes I have bouts of anger because I get angry at the people in this country that let this happen. I get angry at the people that are doing it. But, you have to set those feelings aside. And, I look at this kind of like I did when I was training as an athlete. You show up for the first day, and no matter how well you trained, you're not in shape, you're not ready to perform. But I learned, at a pretty young age that if you just, keep your eye on the ball and just do your job every single day, eventually you'll be performing at a decent level where you can make a difference. And that's what I try to do here. I just try to do my job every day as things cross my desk. And I think that people need to know about these things, and I think we need to be outraged. This is what I try to report. And I do it in the spirit of trying to unify the good people in this country, and most of the people are good, against the horrible people who truly, and I'm not saying this in an exaggerated fashion, who truly serve Satan. They don't serve Jesus. They don't have the same values as we do. It's a pervasive lifestyle that's attempting to subjugate and enslave all of us. And the sooner we all realize this and band together, the better chance we have of pushing this back. That's what motivates me every single day.
Amen. And well said, too.
We have about 10 minutes left. Let's take another phone call. 808. You're up next. You're live on the Hagmann Hagmann Report with Dave Hodges. 808.
That would be you in the submarine, based on the audio I'm getting here.
Hey, we're going to go to another caller. It says no caller. You could be an international caller. You heard the beat.
Hi. Hey,
hi.
Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, this is for Dave. I want to stay on topic. I'm hearing all this stuff about all these Russians here. I mean, thousands of them. How come, when I go to tell other people, I don't want to look like an idiot because I haven't seen these. I mean, is there pictures of these guys? Is there video of these guys? And then what's the legality if you see like 1,000 Russian soldiers in uniform? I would think they, whatever, if somebody would just, make an incident so it could be known throughout the whole country that, these people are here. I mean, if not, take pot shots at them or something. I mean, I don't know what the legality of it is. I don't know what, are we friends with the Russians? I mean, if they come to our country and they're here in uniform, aren't they invaders?
Well, not when they're invited in by the great traitor.
Even if they're invited in, I mean, I don't know.
Well, let me answer your question more concretely about proof. There is a series of photos of Russian soldiers posing in a formal ceremony at Fort Carson with American soldiers in 2012. They also have pictures of these same Russians doing combat training with American soldiers. The Colorado Springs Gazette around that time frame ran an article that said that Russians would be helping with local law enforcement for things like traffic control at their AAA baseball games. And to me, that's when it really got my attention, because that's about martial law training the Russians how to interact with the American public, what the nuances are. We have Sherry Wilcox produced a video that was of Russian soldiers inside of DHS-marked vehicles traveling from eastern Tennessee into western Kentucky on the interstate. That's been run widely. So these pictures I've mentioned, this video I just mentioned, they're all across the country. And then we have the anecdotal accounts that number, probably dozens or even 100 of Russian soldiers in various communities. I mentioned Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and Ketchikan, Alaska as two of them, but they're no means isolated. But then we also, as I mentioned earlier when I was talking to Doug and Joe about this, about the FEMA bilateral agreement. Even if people want to say all your stuff is Photoshop, Dave, you can't take away the fact that FEMA signed an agreement in 2011 with the Russian Foreign Ministry to bring in 15,000 Russians for disaster training. That's a fact. That happened.
That's insanity. I just don't know. With everything else that's going on, with this on top of it, it's driving me nuts. And it's like when I go to try to tell somebody that's kind of on board, that they look at you like you're whatever, you're from another planet. I says, no, this stuff is real. It's happening, but it's hard to show absolute proof of it.
Well, a caller. I think Dave did a great job there of really summarizing the events that you could use. Now, Dave, under the pretext of mutual aid, for example, with these foreign troops, we're seeing this as a cover in many cases, right? Is that what you're saying? For example, bringing in these troops, Russian troops, for disaster training, but is that the real reason? Or is that the reason given publicly or to the public?
Flip a coin, Doug. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not the creator of the document. Now, my best estimate is I think they've reached a point in some areas they don't care what we know.
That's a good point.
Let me go back to 1980 when I read my friend's book, Pat Wood, who co-authored a book called Trilaterals over Washington with Anthony Sutton. And I read that book cover to cover, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I read it and read it. I probably read that book 5 times in one summer. And I couldn't tell enough people about this Trilateral Commission. Then my dad finally got a hold of me via ONI, he goes, "You're about 7 years behind the times, Dave." He said, "That's been around for a while." But no one would talk about this. It's all conspiracy nonsense. There's no Trilateral Commission. I remember doing a database search on a university library for the Trilateral Commission, and I found one mention of it in the Atlantic Monthly Journal in 1977. That was the only reference. Now, today, you see press conferences with Hillary Clinton, for example. I got a picture of her in front of, one picture is in front of the Trilateral Commission monikers and their screen, another one's in front of the CFR. That's out in the open now. It used to be if you talked about the Council on Foreign Relations, you were a conspiracy nut. Now it's fully out there in the open. They're reported on in the media. There's some things that the globalists don't care that you know any longer.
It drives me nuts with the NSA. They have all the emails. They have everything that everybody's ever done. I don't understand why, is it just me? I scream and say, okay, the NSA, get it, with Lois Lerner, with Hillary, with everybody. They have all this information. Why doesn't anybody in Congress stand up and say, okay, NSA, this is an American institution, cough up the emails, cough up, the phone calls, cough up everything. I know that everybody briefly talks about it, but the information's there, and nobody's trying to pull it out.
Man, I sense your frustration.
Most people are too busy working 3 jobs to keep the wolf from the door to know what's going on. They're conditioned by a media that there's no such thing as a conspiracy theory, as if two bad men would never get together to plan to do something wrong. And so that this is what we fight against right now. We're slowly turning the tide on this, but you're not going to see this coming out in a real public way because, first of all, the media is controlled by 6 corporations that serve the global elite. And then secondly, you're looking at a public that's still largely mesmerized by everything that Wolf Blitzer says is true. So to answer your question, that's why I don't think that we're seeing more revelations other than what we do. But I'll go back to this. I'm surprised in some circles that they let as much come out as they do. I really am.
Yeah.
I wrote an article back in, I wrote it in October, but I didn't have the guts to publish it until November 3rd of 2012, right after Stephen's death in Benghazi. And this information was given to me by 2 former high-ranking military sources about how there was a attempted soft coup against the Obama administration by rescuing Stevens. He'd know he'd been set up, targeted for murder, and he would sing like a canary as to everything he'd been up to. And facilitating this rescue effort was Admiral Guyette and General Ham. And I'm not trying to toot my horn, but I was the first person to report this, and I was about 3 to 4 months ahead of the rest of the country because I had good sources. I was afraid to print this. I was afraid that they would come after me. I thought this could be dangerous to my family. This is why I hesitated. And I kept going through the risk assessment with my sources. They were growing impatient with me. They were going to move on to the next source to give information to if I didn't print it. Eventually, I did print it. And they were right. Nothing ended up happening. I can't believe that nothing happened. I can't believe I wasn't attacked. But I wasn't, and they let this information come out. It's almost like, so what? So what are you going to do about it? Fast and Furious, same thing. Yep. They don't deny Fast and Furious is real. They just evade prosecution by not answering congressional subpoenas.
That's yeah, exactly. And Benghazi, not only do we have a citizens commission on Benghazi, but we've got the Benghazi hearings going on, and with it was Jeff Sessions. I'm trying to remember who regardless, do we think anything is going to develop from this? From personally, no, I don't think so, and that's because no one in the as Ted Broder says, in the aggregate, will hold their feet to the fire, and I think it's really sinful. Dave, I'll tell you what, we're really at the end of the program. I know you've been awake, and folks, let me tell you something, okay? God bless you, Dave. I know you had a very early morning this morning. You had mentioned that I don't know if it was on or off air yesterday, but I know you've been up for my goodness for quite a long time, and I know you've got to be totally exhausted. I just want to again extend our thanks to you for being such a great, gracious guest on our program. And
I'm happy to do this anytime you guys want. You've got, in my opinion, the best radio show that's out there, bar none. And not to detract from Alex, you guys are right there neck and neck, and you do a great service. And it's always my honor and privilege to come on. And Joe, if you wouldn't mind, maybe you could send me the link to this interview after the fact, and I'll make it up on my website in the morning.
Absolutely. And just to let you know, we probably got 100 emails from people saying that they heard us throughout the whole show. So
yeah,
kidding now is it was people told me it was a Chrome problem. They couldn't hear it on Chrome, but if they switched to Firefox, they were able to hear it.
Yeah, I had 3 different browsers going in the other office, and frankly, I didn't have a problem. So, but Dave, God bless you, my friend. Stay safe by all means, and and folks, bookmark thecommonsenseshow.com. Listen to Dave Hodges every Sunday, 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. My brother, we'll be talking to you again on a whole bunch of matters, and God bless you. Again, stay safe, and please, please, please keep your reporting going. We all depend on it.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Great to be on.
Thanks, Dave. God bless you.
I can hear the sigh of relief almost, I think, from Dave coming because, man, I know.
It was a great show.
Yeah, he was up his time, I think, a little after 4 this morning.
Yeah, just to give everybody, tomorrow Stan Dale will be on. Wednesday, Paul McGuire is going to be joining us, and Thursday, Dan Duvall will be joining us. So we got a full week ahead, and we have guests for Friday. Just don't know who that's going to be. Got to get a date, or got to get a person in to fill that date. And then we got a lineup of people for next week. Just don't know where we're going to put them either. Yeah. But tomorrow, Stan Dale will be here at 8 o'clock. We'll be here at 8 o'clock. Stan will be on at 9.
The hour before Stan and the hour after going to be filled with analysis of various things that you really need to know about, folks.
New gun regulations sent by Obama today. Just one thing. But tomorrow we'll be back. 8 p.m. Have a good night. God bless. Thanks again, Dave Hodges. His website, thecommonsenseshow.com. Have a great night, everyone.